Welcome to Edwin Eisendrath's It's the Democracy, Stupid. A set of conversations about our government, our politics, and the kind of country we aspire to be. And now, here's your host, Edwin Eisendrath, on WCPT 820, Chicago's Progressive Talk.
Happy Saturday, everybody. It's a beautiful, beautiful day here in Chicago. It was a beautiful night last night after 2 days of storms that blew trees down and left enormous puddles of water. But just like our country, we can go through some terrible weather and end up in a pretty good place. I mean, after all, during the wee hours of the morning, in compliance with court orders and having run out their capacity to delay, the government removed the illegal graffiti from the Kennedy Center. And here's where, I want you to imagine gongs going off and bells ringing and people cheering. Wow, well, that was a moment for us. And unlike their cruel ICE invasions in our cities, this was a removal performed in secret, having built a set of screens to save the man himself the public humiliation of seeing his name come down like a Saddam statue. But down it came. Now, what do we do with a pile of letters? Mr. Odd Jut Plan. Darn Dump Jolt. Darn Dolt Jump. Told Rand Jump. I like that one. PM Don Jut Lard. I don't know. I'm pretty good with anagrams, but I can't find a really useful repurposing of these letters. And when they spell Donald J. Trump, they aren't any good either. So let's just throw them all away. My gosh. The stooges that Trump installed in the Kennedy Center board changed the institution's bylaws to say the board must strip all funding for the Kennedy Center unless the Trump name stays on the building. Okay, the board of the Kennedy Center must strip all funding from the Kennedy Center if it complies with the law. That sure sounds like trustee malfeasance. I mean, what's next? A directive that any money donated to the institution go instead to a new Trump grift masquerading as an arts organization? That is, after all, what happened with the money Congress appropriated to celebrate our 250th birthday. Congress set up an organization called America 250. It was a bipartisan effort and meant to bring us together. Forget that. Trump set up Freedom 250 and transferred the money. The result? He built his claw on the White House lawn. He will have his MMA match. Tickets are being sold at exorbitant prices to ass-kissers and oligarchs. The event is not open to the American public. It will be streamed on Paramount Plus, the network owned by his media allies, the Ellison, and it requires a paid subscription. Wow, there you have it. I mean, there you have it. Donald Trump's idea of a celebration of our great anniversary in his event not even open to the public, where funds are diverted to his friends and allies and to companies where he's a shareholder. Those folks who are there will be shown images linked to our national monuments as if they are the real America. And what do we get? We get to see gold-painted horses outside the Lincoln Memorial. This is them. It's disgusting, but that's them. And all of this spectacle and all of this gold is meant to, but will not hide the truth. The truth. Let's start with Iran, where a deal we understand is now finally taking shape, a deal that reflects the reality that Donald Trump lost his war. Iran is, and any deal will reflect this, far better off than before it began. And the entire world is worse off because of this war. And Donald Trump has not only lost the trust of America's allies and friends, he's also lost for us the credibility to check our adversaries. Worse off. And next up is Europe, where Donald Trump switched sides in the Ukraine war, promising to impose a Russian peace on day one, but forgetting that the Ukrainians, by the way, like the Americans, have a say in their own future. Shouting, "You don't have the cards," Trump tried to bully Ukraine's President Vladimir Zelensky to fall in line. But he didn't. And now, with the help of Europe, Ukraine is pushing back against Russia and winning. Setting aside for the moment that Trump chose a cruel dictatorship over an inchoate democracy, that he chose a military aggressor over a country trying to preserve its borders, that he chose to abandon the idea of an international rules-based order, an order America established. Trump's decisions mean that the free world has moved on without us. It means America at this moment is irrelevant to the progress of freedom. That's his legacy. But you know what? As he also proved in Iran, we aren't irrelevant when it comes to wanton destruction and the empowerment of bad actors around the world. My God. One reason he got all of this so catastrophically wrong, I don't want to, first off, it's his fault. I don't want to make any, the reason he got it wrong is because it is who he is. But what made it possible to get it so catastrophically wrong is that our entire national security apparatus has turned inward as he deploys it against Americans who stand against him. Remember, last September, he directed his government to investigate, prosecute, and disrupt a wide range of organizations that he accused of being Antifa or being anti-Christian or having the wrong ideas about America. The first fruits of that directive include the corrupt indictments of James Comey and the Southern Poverty Law Center. And this week, instead of protecting us from real threats, Kash Patel's agents raided the offices of the Ohio Organizing Collaborative, that great danger to America. They chased down its board members. They confiscated phones and laptops. The organization encourages people to register to vote. But in Trump's America, that is a crime. Not one he's going to pardon people for, because the folks who are encouraging people to register to vote, they're not rich. He's not pardoning them. This week, speaking of rich, I actually read the prospectus for the IPO of SpaceX. No, I did not invest. I recommend it to anyone, however, who's heading for the beach. It is a great science fiction read. The company aims, here's a quote, to build the systems and technologies necessary to make life multiplanetary, to understand the true nature of the universe, and to extend the light of consciousness to the stars. And rich people lined up to invest their money. The perspective says its value is based on 3 pillars: space, connectivity, and AI. The company's AI platform is a thing called Grok. You may have heard of Grok. And about Grok, they say, here's another quote, Grok's deep integration with X enables freshness, relevance, and contextual awareness that we believe is a competitive differentiator. This direct, real-time access to the information and human discourse on X enhances Grok's truth-seeking capabilities by grounding outputs in up-to-date knowledge and diverse viewpoints. Okay, wow. Have you been on X lately? The world's money men have just bet trillions on an AI system trained on I don't know, I doubt trillions, but billions of hate-filled, pornographic posts and virulent political lies. This is their idea of truth. This is the consciousness they want to take to the stars. Wow. Meanwhile, back on planet Earth, where prices continue to climb, where the world no longer benefits from the steadying influence of our great democracy, where a madman celebrates our great birthday in a publicly funded private party that desecrates our national monuments, it sure is a nice first step to see his name in the trash pile, where it belongs, where his administration will go. And the first step is November, and we are headed there. All right, folks, I have a great show for you today, beginning with the fabulous Amanda Marcotte as soon as we get back. Stay tuned.
You're listening to Edwin Eisendrath's It's the Democracy, Stupid on WCPT 820.
Okay, welcome back. The senior politics writer at Salon WCPT.com. Star of the podcast Standing Room Only, Amanda Marcotte is back with us. Amanda, thank you for joining me today.
Thanks for having me.
Before we talk about anything else, can we take a moment to enjoy the graffiti removal project that happened overnight in DC?
Yeah, no, good times. I do kind of wish they wouldn't do this at 3 in the morning when I can't enjoy it, but it was nice news to wake up to.
And they did well, and they didn't just do it at 3 in the morning, which of course they were going to do. They did it behind a screen. Now they didn't put the names up behind a screen, but the delicate ego of the man in the White House needed to be protected, I guess.
Yeah, I think it's worth zooming out for a moment and just really trying to remind ourselves that we've gotten used to it, but this is insane. It's insane to have somebody so narcissistic in office that they just slapped their name up on the Kennedy Center, and that there are just so many people who are willing to indulge this, who are willing to go out of their way to enable this narcissism. I mean, this is it's almost impossible for me to wrap my mind around. I feel like even one person in enabling a narcissist like this is crazy, but that so many people do it, it's wild.
Well, they're um, greed,
Yeah.
doing it for themselves. They think if I can just rename Penn Station for Donald Trump, I'll get my contracts. If I can just destroy 60 Minutes, I can get my mergers. If I can just put a bill in that says we need a $250 piece of currency with Donald Trump's face on it, I'll get invited maybe to sit in the ballroom. I might get a good seat. I mean, people are greedy and small.
Yeah, I think it's important to remember that not one person who's involved in any of this glazing of Donald Trump actually likes the man or cares about him. I think John Ossoff from Georgia is right when he says that one of the reasons Trump is so eager to do this right now is he knows that the second he's dead, no one will lift a single finger to remember him.
I hope he's wrong. I hope we remember. We have to learn from these lessons.
Well, you know what I mean. Well, people aren't going to be slapping Trump's name on buildings. They're not going to be building memorials to him. The second he's dead, even his supporters, I think, will be a little relieved.
Yeah, well, I think the second he's out of office, and I don't know which is going to come first because he's not very healthy, but whichever comes first is the moment that all changes.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
he has no value to people outside of his, and no matter how many times his name gets put on a building, I hope deep down inside he understands that that's not the same as love.
Well, maybe in his life it has been, sad. But I don't care about his psychic life. I don't, this, but, and the president, in fairness, that's not how we should think about any president, right? I mean, Machiavelli, he's a little bit maligned, but he said it takes the prince to know the people and the people to know the prince. And what he meant was, look, the inner life of the guy doesn't matter. It matters what you think of the ruler, what they're doing for you. I mean, he was actually trying to say something good. Um, Amanda, I continue to be a big fan of yours and your work. Through this difficult year, you have been fearless and you've gone where people are most anxious on topics of race and gender and religion, the things that Donald Trump used to divide us. You go right after, and that takes a certain amount of chutzpah.
Well, thank you.
Yeah. No, and it's really, and you do it well. So those ideas, all of those areas we're trying to devise, they are on display in the Department of Losing Wars. So I'd like to spend a minute and get your thoughts on the utter failure in Iran and some of the things that the fool in charge over there is doing.
Yeah, I feel like the situation was set from day one, which is that this was an unwinnable war, but it's also an unstoppable war. And I think that the reason for that is that the second Iran won, which was kind of almost from the beginning that Iran won this war, it created this doom loop where Iran has won. Trump cannot allow himself to admit that Iran has won, and anything that would stop the war would require admitting that Iran has won. This is a paradox, and the war will not be ended until that paradox is resolved. That paradox isn't going to be resolved as long as Trump is in power. And so this, like, how many times has it been now? 39 that he has gloriously announced the end of the war, and then of course it all fell apart. It's going to be 39 more times in the next 39 weeks. It's going to be until he's out of power. And I'm, I hope I'm wrong. I hope that somehow this breaks, but I don't see a way out of this. Iran won. The only way to a peace negotiation is admit that Iran won. Trump cannot admit that Iran won. So here we
Yeah.
are.
So then, just so we're clear for everybody, because the pushback will be, oh, we bombed them to obliteration. Iran wins because they were given a new weapon by us on day 6 of this war, which was that they can control traffic through the Straits of Hormuz. And that they can survive as an administration and now have this weapon, which they did not have before. And it is globally as powerful as a nuclear weapon for the damage it can do to the world's economy. So,
Yeah.
that's why they won. And we lost for other reasons. We're worse off. But Amanda, I don't think it's going to last the rest of his time because he all the moneyed interests in the world, and frankly, all the rest of us, need that strait to be open. The reality of its being closed is causing such enormous pain, not just in terms of gas prices, but in terms of fertilizer and in terms of the nitrogen that's going to be used in all the tech industries. So everybody supporting him is saying, and all the nations in the world are saying, you have to end this, you idiot. And I know he doesn't really care much, but I think he does. I just think he's going to have to come up with some big distraction.
Well, what he's been trying to do, right, is use reality TV tactics to create the illusion that he won the war, right? So
Mhm.
now he has this idea, oh, we're going to go to Europe and have a signing ceremony, and he's hoping that like a ceremony will make people think that he won the war, and
But he's not even going.
yeah, but like the problem, of course, is that the details of any negotiation are going to be reported on
Yeah.
as not as good as what Obama had gotten through diplomacy with Iran, and is functionally admitting that the US lost the war. And I think that we've seen it happen over and over again. Trump goes right back to square one, which is he can't. And I do believe him when he says, I don't care about inflation. I love the inflation. He's a sadistic monster. He hates Americans. So, yeah, he will like succumb to political realities if he thinks it's going to undermine his political power. But at the end of the day, I think he hates and resents Americans for needing things from him, like lower gas prices, and not kissing his feet enough. And I hear you that there's all these political realities, but I think that he's just too dumb and narcissistic to give in to them. And I don't really see a way for him to do what he thinks needs to be done, which is pretend that he won the war and fool just enough people that he can walk away without it bothering him that everyone kind of knows that he just lost the war.
Yeah. Well, that if you're right, then there's going to be an enormous amount of pain all over the
Yeah.
planet for
No,
future
no, I
years.
wish I was wrong because
Yeah.
I also have to buy groceries.
Groceries and gas, right? And people need food, and around the world, it's not just in the United States that this is a terrible problem. I mean, it's a terrible problem in Asia. It's a terrible problem in Europe. It's a terrible problem even in Africa. I mean, the whole world has been screwed up by this. So, do you think our failure there is entirely his ego, or is part of it a retasking of the Department of Defense's energies away from actual threats that they might have analyzed before this and instead focused on purges to make sure that there are no blacks and no women and no dissenters amongst the ranks of, I'm sorry, not dissenters is the wrong word, and no one who isn't an ass kisser amongst the military brass.
Oh, 100%. I think that you can even pull out even more and consider the fact that Pete Hegseth is a straight up authoritarian. He's a fascist. He has the mentality of these people. And it is this view that war, it's just a rejection of the idea that war is politics by other means, right? I'm sure in some level he thinks that he agrees with that because he's also not a very bright man. But at the end of the day, Hegseth has made it very clear that he thinks that the only aspect of war that matters is beating somebody else up, that there's only violence and domination, that everything else is nonsense, that only woke like softies that think that women should serve, that think that people of color should serve would think, right? He puts everything besides white men are the best and everyone else is a fool. Like his only two beliefs are white men are the only people that are competent and violence is the only thing that matters. And then he just treats everything else as woke nonsense. And he will never be able to accept that the reality, the reason that Iran won this war is that it is true. War is politics by other means. They understood the political situation. They understood that the economy matters. They understood that the opinion of voters in the United States matters. They understood, that people shipping oil through the Strait of Hormuz matter. And because Hegseth is just a dummy-dum who only thinks that violence and domination are the only tools that are necessary, he walked right into this situation. And of course, Trump agrees with him and so fell for it as well. And it's, unfortunately, the problem with these people who have these kind of authoritarian ideologies is they never succumb to evidence because they also think that thinking is for wimps and that strategy is for wimps and that that's also more woke nonsense. So if you point out to them how many times their ideology fails, they just brush it aside and they say, well, the problem is we didn't hit them hard enough. We hear that from Trump all the time.
Yeah, I guess the short way of saying that is Pete Hegseth is reminding us why fascists lose wars.
Yeah. I was actually on the podcast the other day, and the host made a really good point. He said that a lot of wars are lost because of, like, going all the way back to the ancient Spartans, this idea that logistics, that caring about your human resources is feminine woke nonsense. And what happens, of course, is like all the way back to ancient times, you have people who have that mentality that all you need is violence, forget very basic things like making sure that the army is fed and rested.
Yeah.
And they lose, based on things like that. It's so very important to understand about that. There's so much more that goes into winning a war than just having bigger guns, and they just refuse to accept that.
Um, uh, I want to push you further on Pete Hegseth's notion that you just have to be white and violent, because I even think that's not enough for him. Because in the last couple of weeks, he has started to make distinctions amongst white folks about their religions.
Yes.
Talk about that.
Uh, and another rule of authoritarians is that once they define the in group and the out group, right?
The in group keeps getting smaller.
The in group keeps getting smaller. So a very amusing and leopards eating their face story this week was that the Defense Department made a change that Pete Hegseth has been wanting to make for a long time.
I'm sorry to interrupt you for 1 second. My dog is banging at my door. I have to let him in. Keep going.
No
I'll be
worries.
right back.
The Defense Department made a change that Hegseth has been wanting to make for a long time, which is to reduce the number of official religious designations that the military recognizes among service members from 200 and something, I forget the exact number, to only 31. But it
Right.
got even dumber than that, which is out of the 31, 22 were variations of Christian. And now, according to the Defense Department, there's only one kind of Jew, only one kind of Muslim. They got rid of atheists, they got rid of Wiccans, they got rid of pagans, they got rid of,
Mormons.
yeah. And then what really kind of landed was that they also did not classify Mormons. They do have Mormons on the list. They have the
But not
Church
as
of
Christian.
Latter-day Saints on the list,
Mm.
but they did not classify them as Christian.
Yeah.
Out of the 22 Christian denominations, they said Mormons are not Christian. And to me, this wasn't surprising because Hegseth is an evangelical. And if you've ever actually heard what white evangelicals think about Mormons, they think that they're a cult. They think that they're not Christian. And they are very loud about this amongst themselves. And I think a lot of Mormon leadership has ignored this because they want to be in political coalition with the GOP. And so there was a lot of outrage from Mormon leadership.
Senator Mike Lee had a few things to say about it
But
from Utah.
you can see, however, how Mormons fall into this trap again, because Hegseth said, okay, we're going to change it. But instead of classifying Mormons as Christians, they just took the word Christian off all the other denominations. So now it just says Pentecostal, Protestant, Quaker, etc. It doesn't say Christian that. And so, like, functionally, he still couldn't admit that Mormons are Christians.
Right. Right. Yeah.
And I mean, Catholics are next. If anyone's wondering who's next on the like chopping block, because a lot of evangelicals don't think of Catholics as Christians either.
Wow. And it affects our this internal purge process. This I'm going to purify our government from all these people inside I don't like, takes their eye off the ball. It means that they weren't paying attention to the intelligence. They weren't listening to the voices that said, if you go and invade Iran, this is certainly what's going to happen. And so they say afterwards, no one told us. No one told, we had no idea this could happen. Well, I mean, of course you were told, but you were too busy kicking people out to pay any attention.
And I do have to imagine that a lot of the information that they were ignoring was coming from the kinds of people they think don't count, right? The reason that a lot of Black people and women have been promoted so high in military leadership is they're competent. They're
Right.
good at their jobs.
Wait,
And
wait, wait. When you enter into an institution that is primarily white for decades, and you start to rise in the ranks as someone who is a woman or Black, you, you're doing it because you are actually really good,
yeah, it's
really
not
good,
easy. And you're
really.
probably tough as nails.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, no, I think they probably thought this. I think two things. One, they treated all information that they were getting as suspect because it came from what they considered a woke military, right?
Or
And
because it
so,
didn't come from Donald Trump, who
yeah.
is
And
the source
so,
of truth.
and also just it is the way that authoritarians think. They think that information and analysis and strategy are weak. That's feminine. That's, real men act first and then think later, maybe, or just not never at all. Like thinking is kind of characterized as weak. I really think that Umberto Eco had an essay in the 90s where he analyzed what he called the fascism, which is,
By the way, it is a great article. Anybody, you can find it online. It reflects his childhood growing up with Mussolini, and it is fabulous and as relevant today as it was when he was a kid before he even wrote it.
yeah,
Glad you brought that up.
yeah, he folded in observations of like fascism in Spain and other places in
Mhm,
South America and
mhm.
stuff, and sort of created this, like it's always a little different depending on the cultural context, but he came up with like 13 concepts that he felt define fascism wherever it rises. And one of them, one of the biggest, most important ones that I keep coming back to, is this idea that fascists believe that thinking is weakness, that intellectualism is effeminate. And so inherently, like, that means when you're running the military and you have this mentality, you treat all intelligence analysis as woke nonsense that needs to be ignored.
Just
No
like you
matter,
treat
like,
rules
forget
of
that we
engage,
all,
just like you treat rules of engagement,
exactly.
laws. These are things that just get in the way. So let's be lawless. Let's
Yeah.
just blow up boats in the Caribbean and kill those fishermen. Because
And
why
you
not?
ignore all the historical reasons that these things developed, right? Because that's studying, that's reading,
Mhm.
that's learning, which is more woke nonsense.
Yeah, yeah. Look, I am old, and as long as I've been on this planet, I've been a man, and that's who I am. And their view about who we are is not like, sorry guys, a lot of great thinkers have been men in history. And it's like hello. That's-
Well, I mean, I will say that one of the sort of things like feminist theory is this idea that masculinity is fragile. And what they mean by that is that your manhood can be taken away at a moment's notice in this sort of like vision of manhood, right? And
if that's your
so,
vision, sure.
yeah.
Yeah,
And so, yeah, if you're like a great thinker as a man, then they would say, well, that's not a real man.
yeah, yeah.
It's again a
Uh,
doom loop that these people get into.
well, you've quoted two of them here, Clausewitz and Echo, and both of them fought a lot. One of them was a warrior too. So yeah, yeah.
I mean, intelligence analysis comes from spies, right? A lot
Well,
of
no,
it.
let's talk about that too for 1 second, because it isn't just the Department of Defense that's being purged and repurposed to take on itself. Trump issued this national security memorandum last September that moved the entire anti-terrorism apparatus of the United States to focus on Antifa and the wokeness in America, right? And we're seeing the fruits of that now. We saw it in the attack and indictment on the Southern Poverty Law Center. And this week we've seen it on the Ohio Organizing Collaborative, this just little group that helps people register to vote in Ohio, right? But Cash Patel's guys are all chasing their board members all over Cleveland, like trying to issue them a subpoena and take their phones, right? This is the threat that to America that they're focused on, which just like this misreading of Iran puts us in a terribly dangerous place.
Yeah, and I can't get past how funny it is to me that Kash Patel and all these other guys, they cast themselves as these big tough dudes, right? And yet they are scared. They're shaking in their boots. They're so scared of Antifa, who inevitably turns out to be like
Aunt
soft belt,
Aoife, yeah, my
yeah,
aunt,
soft-bellied middle-aged researchers,
yeah,
grandmothers driving people to the polls. It's like these are the people you're scared of are some of the like least violent, like most kind and least threatening people in the country. Like leftist organizers are by and large gentle people.
yeah, and they're terrified, and and Cash Patel is a deeply troubled man, but that in part is why they get. Look, there was a time when the mayors of Chicago would never appoint somebody, I know this is a Chicagoan, to be the police chief unless that person was so deeply flawed and they knew it, they could fire him on a moment's notice because they could say, oh, well, he's a drunk, even though they knew that when they put him in the job, right? Cash Patel is that kind of guy. He is so deeply flawed that and in over his head, and a job that in his dreams he couldn't be qualified for, that he's going to do whatever the boss wants so that the truth doesn't get told on him.
Yeah, there was a really good analysis. I forget who wrote it in the New York Times recently about all the research that shows that under fascist and authoritarian governments, mediocre people tend to rise in the ranks
Sure.
because it's often the only way that they're ever going to get these promotions that they could not get in a more democratic egalitarian system. And I think that when Hannah Arendt was writing about the banality of evil, I think what a lot of people are overlooking when she was making this point was that a lot of the like Nazi upper echelon were just people that were losers. And the only reason that they rose to the high ranks in the Nazi party was that this was the kind of system that's fascism rewards mediocrity in for two reasons. One, qualified people tend to sort of self-eliminate.
Yeah.
And two, fascist leaders want mediocre people because they want the people beneath them to understand that their job is entirely dependent on loyalty, that they would never, ever, ever have this job on merit. And
Yeah.
Kash Patel is the most obvious example of this. The
Poster
guy
child of that.
knows.
Yeah.
Yeah, he knows he's in over his head. He knows that the only way he stays in place is by placating Trump.
So, admission, my favorite president, toss up, but it's George Washington. Not, not perfect man, but the reason he's my favorite as president, maybe not as person, but as president, was that he was determined to build a government of the smartest people he could find in the country, and all of them were better educated than he was. Most of them were smarter than he was, and he wasn't afraid of that one bit. He took them in and he said, "We are going to build a country together, and I am going to, by dint of leadership here, get you guys focused in the same direction. And I want all of your different points of view and all of your fighting and input, and we're going to make it work." And and Donald Trump is the opposite. Like, he wants no one with a different point of view, and that's on display at every one of his cabinet meetings, which are the most revolting waste of taxpayer dollars imaginable.
Yeah, it's very funny to me because there's nothing stronger than somebody who's willing to sit back and listen. Somebody who's willing to admit that they don't know everything. Somebody who's willing to admit, God forbid, that they were wrong and change their mind. That takes real strength of character. And it is funny because we are ruled right now by people who think the opposite. They think that strength is being belligerent, ignorant, and refusing to listen to other people. And we're going to all pay for it, unfortunately.
We
But
are paying for it.
yeah, and but you look through history and the best leaders were definitely people that were willing to imagine that somebody else might know something they don't know.
Yeah, and learn from everybody.
Yeah.
Learn from everybody. I wanted one more part in Iran, and we'll be done with it. Um, if you're wrong, and they do reach a deal this week, and it will do, as you say, have to acknowledge the true facts that Iran is stronger and we're weaker. So it will be a deal that Donald Trump wants to hide. He will try and bury it in lies, and by doing something else big that takes attention. And what could possibly be as big as announcing a deal that you've lost a war? And my great fear, and I want to say it can't possibly happen, but you can't do this with this administration. On June 19th, the Barack Obama Center officially opens in Chicago. I've been there. It is fabulous. And that's the big opening ceremony, and all the other presidents who ever lived will be there, not Donald Trump. You think he would try and indict Barack Obama? He's talked about it.
Indict him?
Yeah. That's the
Um,
kind of thing. That's the kind of thing that hides his fiasco in Iran, and he's tried to do it.
I mean, I wouldn't put it past him. I don't know on what or
Well,
I mean that they make stuff
make
up,
stuff
but
up.
it would be hard to hide from Barack Obama that you're investigating him, I
Yeah.
think.
Well, I agree. I think it's not likely, but it's the kind of thing these terrible people think about.
Yeah, I'm sure they've put it on the table. But I will say that the New York Times reporting by Maggie Haberman and Jonathan Swan this week about the cover up of the Epstein files and their
Oh,
efforts
wasn't
to
that
exonerate.
good?
It was good, but it was actually very soothing because they are a bunch of idiots. They don't know what they're doing. It is a clown show. So I agree Trump will probably try to do something to conceal the Iran war, but all the right now, I may be wrong, like, but right now it seems all of his ideas are to do his reality show tactics, right? And this has been effective for him in the past, right? I think he'll do some kind of ceremony, he'll declare victory, maybe there will be a trophy, or maybe there will be a big stack of papers, or maybe someone will come out and give him a medal. You know what I mean? Like they'll do
Yeah.
something that looks on TV like his idea of what a winning a war looks like, right? And they're going to try to create the visual image of winning a war and hope that that tricks people into not noticing that we lost the war.
Well, his friend Bibi Netanyahu will be screaming about the betrayal so much that this is. I mean, when they go like when they both have this problem, it's going to be everybody's going to hear about it. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that the news media, for whatever reason, is not willing to play ball with Trump as they have in the past, of like letting his reality show antics sway them. And instead there's going to be a lot of people just reading the actual deal
Yeah.
and saying no.
Well, I mean, Trump and his team are still very, very good at getting the media to use their language. I mean, even in the right before you came on in the news report, um, the little news break we had, the reporter was talking about the kinetic strikes, right? That just happened. Like, okay, really seriously, like, did anybody talk about kinetic strikes before like 6 weeks ago? But they like, that's the word you're going to use, and all it means is you actually hit somebody. I mean, you used force, right? That's what kinetic is. Like, okay, so let's just be redundant because they are. Pick like these guys, they get in your heads and you start using their words, and that becomes very problematic.
Yeah, and I think already the media has been bullied into not using the words won and lost around the war. Trump has already kind of bullied them into the reframing as a peace deal, and treating that as if it was the same
Yeah.
thing as a victory. But at the end of the day, the fact that at the most that he's going to get is the Strait of Hormuz is opened again. So we're back to where we were before, and there is no nuclear deal. It is going to be reported as this is less than Obama got through diplomacy, and he can't. I do think his ego just will collapse. And I think that there's a lot of people like Lindsey Graham and whatnot in his ear who are saying, you don't want to do less than Obama did, and knowing that that is endlessly effective on him.
It is, but I think Trump also knows he cannot order American troops to go invade Iran. He
No,
can't. I mean, we won't
no.
do it. So I mean, that's not true. Soldiers will do what they're ordered to do, but America will turn on this so fast that so I think he can't make this a victory.
No, I think
Lindsey
he's
Graham
gonna
doesn't care, but
I
idiot.
think he's gonna just hope that signing some kind of peace
Yeah.
deal and reopening the strait and then declaring that as a victory will just work. And maybe to a certain degree, we'll all be so tired of it, we'll let him pretend to do that so he doesn't keep doing this to us.
Yeah, maybe, but we're heading into midterms and candidates aren't going to let them off the hook. Hey, let's talk about something more fun. Was it than the war? Why don't you talk to us about Turning Point USA?
Oh no. Oh. So yeah, I've been reporting I was reporting pretty heavily on Turning Point USA before Charlie Kirk was killed, and it's been kind of fascinating watching the organization try to evolve after his death. And it's mostly been not very successful. I would say it's largely been just this like slow motion failure. Without him at the helm, the organization has just lost its way. Their events have dwindling numbers of people. They don't seem to know what they're going to do next. But that said, in San Antonio last weekend, they had a women's leadership summit that had a shocking number of attendees for a Turning Point USA event now, which was like over 2,000 girls and young women showed up. I think part of that was there's not like a ton of conferences or conventions or get-togethers for young women that are evangelical conservative Christians. And so this is it. And so it had pretty strong turnout, but I watched the videos of the speeches and I was deeply alarmed at how radical the messaging of the right-wing media for young Christian women has gotten. It is very deeply misogynist and hateful. And to this extent, like there was a speaker who defended witch burning. Yes. There was another one who, and a lot of the speakers like were like yelling at the audience, almost like telling them that they are too feminist, even though it's a collection of girls that are there precisely because they've embraced a lot of conservative views. But they were still yelling at another speaker yelled at them for thinking that men should have any share in housework at all.
You
And
mean, wait, I want to make sure I understand what you're saying. They yelled at them for thinking.
yeah, yes, yes. Yeah, there was how dare you say that he should pick up his undies was the theme of another speech. There was a lot of stuff about how if you're single, it's probably you're not working hard enough or lowering your standards enough. There was a lot of admonishment that women today love themselves too much and they need to kind of love themselves less. It was very I would say the theme of the conference felt to me like internalized misogyny is good.
So Jesse Jackson, my fellow Chicagoan, would go around and tell people, you are somebody. And you're telling me this was organized to tell these young women, you are nobody.
Yes, yeah,
Yeah.
that
You
that
you exist only in the reflected light of your male counterparts.
Yeah, and I found that to be an interesting shift in rhetoric because the Christian right for a long time has been pushing the idea of complementarianism and female submission and sort of this idea that men and women are different, but they complement each other. They're not unequal, was how they would argue. When you actually look at the details, of course they're unequal. It's like men lead and women follow is always going to be in an unequal relationship, but they would try to sell it to women by saying, oh, but you're so valuable and men will love you if you submit. So you'll be a cherished person in the household, right? And it's a very strong shift, I think, away from trying to sell it with roses. And now there was a lot less carrot and a lot more stick this time, which is you are failing as a woman if you don't submit more.
Well,
You
I
are
think this is
failing.
them. That's a desperate organization that does that.
I think so. I
Yeah.
think so. I'm not sure like how the audience was responding. Like there was it was hard to say. Like they didn't pan to them a ton, and when they did, it was usually like somebody announcing a engagement or pregnancy, and the audience being like, "Yay!"
Hmm.
But I'm curious how this is landing for young women because it isn't how they're living their lives. I will say I think that's part of the reason they're so desperate is even young Christian women are increasingly going to school and they're getting married later, and I think it is somewhat them trying to turn that ship around.
That's interesting. And frightening, um, but interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, one of the speakers got married at 18 years old and was like scolding the audience that they don't understand that women are inherently evil because of Eve and the apple. And she's now 21.
Oh, okay. So she'll be divorced at 23 and write a book about it. Yeah. Um, you also wrote that something that I loved, and I think we should be important. We've spent a lot of time talking about the self-destructiveness of Donald Trump's crowd, whether it's Turning Point USA or the Defense Department or the White House. But you also wrote that they're zombies, that they come back from the dead. You can't, that you think they're gone, they're not gone. And I think that is, we aren't done with these people. And I think that's a very important thing that you wrote.
It is important to remember. I think it's good that they're losing right now. They are losing the culture war. They know that they've lost it. There is a sheen of desperation on Trump and his followers. We've seen like the America 250 events that they were trying to organize have just been in slow motion collapse, right? The Rededicate 250 event was a failure. The attempt to have a concert in DC has fallen apart. So we're seeing a lot of failure, but in my long experience, and I'm older than I look. They
If
find a
it's
way
true,
back.
lucky you. I am as old as I look, and it's really depressing.
Well, I remember we were here before, like the collapse of George W. Bush after Iraq, after Hurricane Katrina, and the rise of Barack Obama. And I think there was a point right then that a lot of people started to convince themselves that this was going to be the new American hegemony, right? Like that it was going to be liberal, it was going to be democratic, it was going to be diverse. And instead, Trump happened and these monsters came roaring back in the ugliest form imaginable. And so I think it's really important to remember that the right is always looking for new angles to work. They're always looking for new scapegoats. They're looking for new paranoias to stoke and exploit. And so, unfortunately, we can't let our guards down.
We need to do more than that. I mean, one of the reasons they came back after that is something you and I haven't talked about, but they had control of the Supreme Court.
Yes.
And this court isn't Donald Trump. I don't mean it's Donald Trump's court. This is sort of convergent evolution. They have been working on the court for 40 years, separate and had nothing to do with Donald Trump. But that court stops the things that the left in America wants to do. They stopped campaign finance reform to allow unlimited Elon Musk money in the politics. They stopped any attempt to fight climate change. They threw out the Voting Rights Act and said it's okay to, I don't know, somehow the 14th Amendment says you can't discriminate by race, but they've just said, go ahead, the federal courts are going to look the other way. Um, just absolutely appalling. And so if we win, Amanda, we have to we have to make sure that the court is no longer able to void our progress and enable our backsliding. And that's got to be a very top priority.
Yeah, if you were going to say the single biggest thing that I'm worried about Democrats failing when they gain power again, it's probably this, and because it's so hard to imagine they're not going to fail. When Biden got back into office, there were a lot of people making this exact point, right? That
Yes,
he
he
need,
even had a commission on it.
yeah,
The
but
commission
that
had a
was
great report, and then they did nothing.
well, and as soon as he announced a commission, I was like, well, they're never going to do anything because the whole point of having a commission and doing a study is to avoid having to take action, right?
Well, they came up with
And
some good ideas we can now use, right? They couldn't use them. We can use them. We can learn from the Biden experience, which is if you just focus on making life better for Americans, the virus will die. And it didn't die.
no, and I think unfortunately the situation is so bad that the solutions I feel have to be more radical than the commission came up with. I think that we need to, it has to be something along the lines of 21 justices, right? It needs to
Whatever it
be
is, it has to be. We have to make sure it happens.
like
Yeah,
term limits, things like that, so that we can't just have Clarence Thomas just stinking up the place for 20 years, another
yeah,
one,
yeah.
right? Another Sam Alito just having this almost godlike powers over to just basically void the democratic process and the
Yeah.
concept of we the people.
Yep. So I agree with you. We have to deal with the court, and we have to deal with the symbols of MAGA power. I've always thought we should turn Mar-a-Lago into a Smithsonian Museum of American Fascism. But we need to take we need to really be walk and chew gum. We need to make life better for Americans. We need to close that wealth gap, and we need to eliminate the structures that the right has put in place to get in our way.
Absolutely. I think, there's so much that needs to be done. And I'm just so deeply worried that Democrats didn't learn anything from the Biden administration's failures on this
Well,
front.
we'll see. I mean, I'm happy with the we're almost out of time, but the primaries we've had so far have given us a new generation of candidates.
Yeah.
And the difference isn't so much left, right. It is the era of let's make a deal is gone, and the era of get stuff done is here, and that and these. So I'm not sure they will make the same mistakes. They'll make their mistakes, but I don't think they'll make the same ones.
Yeah, I hope you're right. I hope that everyone understands that if we don't make the structural changes, any economic improvements
They can erase.
will be erased
Yep.
immediately because
Yep.
we have to you have to lay a foundation before you start building the walls. And I think that has been forgotten.
Yep. That's good counsel to end on. Amanda, just tell people how they find your good work.
Yeah, so I write at salon.com a few times a week. I have a newsletter there called Standing Room Only. And I also have a YouTube show called Standing Room Only. We're on summer hiatus right now, but I am doing short form content. So if you subscribe, you can see not only videos of me talking about the issues of the day, but filmed in my own home. So
All right. Thank you, Amanda. A pleasure to catch up.
thank you.
Bye.
You're listening to Edwin Eisendrath's It's the Democracy, Stupid on WCPT 820.
All right, everybody, welcome back. I have an enormous treat for you because I'm joined by Jillian Bracco, who is a fabulous, careful, thorough, experienced journalist who has turned those talents towards one of the most important and least visible issues in America, and that is what our tax dollars are paying for in terms of ICE flights and what that means for who we are. Jillian, thank you.
Thank you for having
Gillian.
me. Yeah, it's Gillian with a hard G.
Yep, sorry, I apologize.
That's
I knew
okay.
that, and thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
I have so many questions and so much I want to talk to you about. And I guess I want to start with the letter you wrote to the Denver City Council, right? They're preparing for a vote on a matter that tangentially, at least, involves ICE. One of the sentences in that letter took my breath away. You wrote, I'm just going to read, employees for ICE's charter airlines have told me in recent months that in an event of an emergency, they've been instructed to save themselves and leave the migrant passengers to die.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I want to start there just to understand the mindset of people around that are dealing with it. Who says that?
I think it's people say that when they have been dehumanizing other humans for so long that doesn't seem like one of the most heinous things you could say. The problem is that on ICE flights, every single adult and some children are shackled at the wrists and ankles attached to a chain around their waists. Before I was a journalist, I was a flight attendant. And I can tell you that one of the main obsessions of every flight attendant is keeping the aisle clear and the passengers unencumbered so that if there is an emergency, you can evacuate all of the passengers within 90 seconds. It's actually within 90 seconds with half of the exits blocked. That's what you have to train to do every year to be a flight attendant. And very obviously, someone who is wearing leg irons cannot evacuate quickly in an emergency. And this has been going on for a long time. And flight attendants have been asking for many years, asking their supervisors, asking the pilots, asking the security guards and the ICE agents on ICE flights, well, what are we supposed to do if there's an evacuation? They're not going to be able to get off in 90 seconds. And they either just don't get an answer, or they get shrugged shoulders, or they're told to save themselves and let the passengers on board die. And this isn't theoretical. We know that there have been at least 5 emergency evacuations of ICE aircraft. We only know that from discovery from a court case. So those 5 were between 2014 and 2019, mostly during Trump's first term, when there was the first surge of ICE flights. And we know 2 of the evacuation times for those 5 evacuations, and they were 2.5 minutes and 7 minutes, which is, just atrocious. I mean, 7 minutes, the plane could be entirely burnt up and everyone could die at that point or just die of smoke inhalation. Um, we don't know if there have been more evacuations since 2019. It's very likely that there have been, just by the numbers. But ICE doesn't report anything voluntarily.
Yeah. Um, it's I report on this stuff,
Yeah,
and I've been doing this for years. I haven't lost my sense of humanity yet,
right.
and this just it just
It's appalling.
it's appalling, and
And
we
it's
should not
happening
lose that.
50 to 90 times every single day. There are 50 to 90 ICE flights every single day.
Let's talk about those.
Yeah,
First, who are the companies that are flying people around, and and or involved in the flying people around? Because I guess
sure.
the scheduling of the flights and the companies that fly them aren't the same. And so just help us understand the ecosystem.
Sure. So the sort of big umbrella at the top is a company called CSI Aviation. They're New Mexico based. They're ICE's flight broker. So they're actually assigning all of the flights that ICE wants to the charter airlines that participate. Their contract with the government right now is a 12-month contract. They're about 7 months in, and it's for up to $1.5 billion. And I'm pretty sure they're going to meet that ceiling. They've already spent about 800 million of that contract.
Mm-hmm.
And that's ICE's biggest contract. It's bigger than the private prison contracts. So they hire the actual airlines, the charter airlines that participate. The airlines are probably airlines that most people have never heard of. So Global X is the biggest one. They do most ICE flights. There's also Air Wisconsin, which used to be a regional airline, but has been bought by CSI Aviation, to just charter
Just to
ICE
do this,
flights.
yeah.
Right. There's also Eastern Airlines, which is not the Eastern Airlines of, our youth that, died in the early 90s, different company. Um, there's Omni Air International, which is someone that I've written a lot about. There are also these private jet charters. So this is a thing that has popped up in the last few years where if a rich person has a private jet, they'll lease it to these private jet charter companies on the days that they're not using their private
Mm-hmm.
jets.
Mm-hmm.
And then those companies will, sell charter flights on the planes to other rich people, and they'll also do ICE flights. So there are, billionaires that I've written about who their private jets, their, luxury jets have delivered people to, absolutely hellish conditions. I'm sure we'll talk about the third country removals, but
We will.
one of them, one of these jets that's owned by these billionaires called the Desert family, who are close friends of Trump, have built condos with Trump. Their private jet delivered shackled people to a maximum security prison in Eswatini, formerly known as Swaziland.
Mm.
And right now, there's also a new private jet with this company called Talon Air. And that jet is actually owned by Joe Nakash, who is the founder of Jordache Jeans. So his private jet has done a number of these Africa removals and third country removals as well.
So I want people to know they can vote with their feet and not fly certain airlines. Nobody's really flying these airlines, but you're the one who found the boy with the bunny ears
Yeah.
getting on a Delta flight.
I'm not the one who found it. I was contacted by an activist who found
Right.
it.
You're the one who told us about it.
I'm the one who first reported it.
Yeah.
And I first reported it because he and I, we both track ICE planes, so we communicate a lot. I'm the first one that reported it because he couldn't get interest from mainstream media. He had this damning video showing that Delta Airlines flew Liam Ramos and his father, the boy with the bunny ears, to Dili when they were captured, and couldn't get interest from mainstream media. So I was
Graceful.
very, grateful that he went to me, even though I'm not a big name. And of course, the story, went as insane as we thought it would be, or went as viral as we thought it would be, because it's just horrible. I mean, what you see, he lives in Minnesota, and so he did a FOIA request because he had watched every single ICE charter flight
Right. Right.
as it loaded the shackled people during the surge, and he had never seen any children on board getting on
Right.
board the plane, or
Right.
obvious children getting on board the plane. And so when they said Liam Ramos is in Dili already, he, did
Searched for it.
some computer searches
Mhm.
and realized that Delta was the only airline, or the only flight between Minneapolis and San
Mm.
Antonio, which is the major airport nearest to
Right.
Dili. So he had been asking for weeks, "Hey, Delta, are you flying people for ICE in ICE custody?" No response. So he FOIA'd the surveillance video for the airport, got it, and then gave it to me.
So,
And
so it's a great story, but
yeah,
the reason I'm asking is less about the Ramos family and more
yeah.
about like what other airlines are doing this, so that flyers can say to their airlines, like United, I was going to get on a flight, but I'm not doing it if you're doing this.
Yeah.
So Delta did it. Who else have you found
I
is
mean, that's really the problem. It could be all of them, and we
mm,
just don't know. I know of at least one other Delta flight that
mhm,
transported a child from Mississippi to Texas that the Mississippi Free Press reported on. And I
good
have
organization.
heard,
Yeah.
yeah, they're great. And I have heard of a United flight, unfortunately,
Mm,
doing these removal flights. Now, that one wasn't of children, that was just a deportation. Um, Most deportations these days are, happening on board these charter aircraft with these shackled people.
good.
But some
Not
people,
good, but good.
generally white people, being deported to Europe are still deported, just on commercial flights, and those people aren't shackled.
Okay.
Um, but in terms of transporting the children, I only know of Delta so far. The problem is nobody's talking about it.
Okay.
So it
Well,
could be all of them.
all right. Thank you.
Yeah.
Um, One other thing you wrote that is stunning is that most of the ICE flights, when they're transporting passengers, are around the country,
Hmm.
and that people are
Yeah.
being shuffled around and sometimes flown around several times. That sounds very expensive and very
Hmm.
confusing, and hard to understand. Why would you take a migrant who you have detained
Hmm.
and fly them from one location to another? And how common is this?
Yeah, I think that's big. One of the big misunderstandings about ICE flights is, I said there are 50 to 90 flights a day. Only 10 to 20 of those will be the deportation or removal flights. The rest are domestic. And so some of them will be these sort of roundup flights where they're taking recently captured people and flying them down to ICE's main detention hubs in the South, Louisiana, Texas, Florida, Arizona. Um, but there are also an increasing number of shuttle flights between the detention centers. In fact, the rate of those shuttle flights between the detention centers has been way higher under Trump's second term than the regular removals. Removals have about doubled, but the shuttle flights have almost tripled. And what we hear from migrants, from immigration attorneys and rights groups is that they're using these shuffle flights to wear people down, basically to torture them, to make their court cases harder to file. Every time you're moved to a different federal district, you have to start your court case all over again. You
Mm,
have to get a new lawyer, you have to get your documents moved, and you have to do it from a detention center. You're farther away from your family. The entire time that you're being transported, you are not in the ICE locator system. So you have no way of telling your family, hey, I'm going to be transferred to Arizona tomorrow. There's no way to know that. So people will just disappear from the locator system. And what we hear, I've heard this many times now from migrants, is that they'll be shuffled 5 times in a week. So basically they'll
No.
be, yeah, oh yeah, they'll go from Florida to Los Angeles to Mesa, and then they'll be put on, an 18-hour bus to El Paso. Like they'll be put in this sort of ringer, this washing machine for like a week where they're just disappeared from the locator system. Families and immigration attorneys don't know if it's because they've been deported or because they're just traveling. And then it might be days once you actually arrive somewhere before you show up in the locator system again, or before you can call your family member and say, hey, I'm in Arizona now. And, the discomfort, not being able to sleep. The food sucks just as much on ICE air as it does in the detention centers.
Well, and you can't find a lawyer. I mean, you're like,
Right,
hello, who's going to represent you? Like,
right.
oh, wait, I'm talking to my lawyer. Oops, nope, that's a different state. That's a different system.
Right.
Um,
And the reason that they do this is so that people will give up on their cases and sign voluntary, quote unquote, voluntary removal orders. And it works. People get so exhausted just being shuffled around in this system that they'll just be like, okay, just even though it's dangerous for me in El Salvador or Venezuela or whatever country,
get
I'll
me out of
just,
here.
yeah, get me out of here, and then I'll get out of Venezuela again in some other way, but just get me out of here.
Mm. So
It happens all the
cruelty
time.
is the purpose.
Yeah, 100%.
Okay. Well, that I guess means we have to talk about third country removals.
Ugh. Yeah, it's just some of the cruelest stuff I've ever heard
First,
in my
tell people
entire
what it
life.
is.
Yeah, so I'll tell you what it was supposed to be. There was this thing called the Safe Third Country Program that existed before Trump's second term. It was extremely rarely used, but it was essentially, we're deporting someone, but they can't be deported back to their country of origin because they're going to be unsafe. And what we've done is we've found a third country that will take them, that will resettle them, and this country is safe. Like I said, it was rarely used. And Trump has basically
Turned it on its
bastardized
head.
that, right, and turned it into this thing where all of the people with withholding of removal orders, with Convention Against Torture orders, and legal asylum seekers who haven't had their hearings yet, they'll just scoop them up and they'll send them to another country. And so I've tracked 27 countries so far. I have a tracker of all known third country removal flights on my website. But they'll just scoop these people up and, dump them in some other country. And most of the time, the vast majority of the time, the other country is not offering resettlement, whether they're safe or not. Most of them aren't safe. But they're not offering resettlement. They'll either won't even let them leave the airport, and they'll just put them on a charter plane back to their country of origin, or they'll put them up in a hotel or some kind of government compound near the airport and just be like, look, you can't stay here. So tell us when you want to go, but you can't stay here, and just pressure them to leave. This is their, where to begin? The ones I've been tracking the most are in Africa. So if you go up to Egypt, that corner of Africa, what they do is a lot of Russians. So they send, and these are all on Omni Air International. So Omni takes Russians to Cairo. The Egyptian authorities put them on a charter flight to Moscow, and then that's that. It's a way of getting around these withholding of removal protections. And we know
But
that.
these are people that came to America because Putin will kill them.
Right.
Because
And
they
a
stood up
federal
to him.
judge has ruled that you cannot return them to Russia,
Because
or
they'll be
they will
killed.
be, right.
So we
They-
send them to Cairo so they can be sent to Russia.
Yes. And we know that there are Russian dissidents who have been immediately taken into Russian authorities' custody and disappeared as soon as they get off that Egypt airplane. So we've done that a bunch of times with dozens, perhaps hundreds of Russians. And then you have go to another corner, you've got Ghana. And Ghana is only taking West Africans, and basically they put them in a detention center or a hotel, and they say, okay, you have to go. You can either pick a place to go, or we're going to force you back to your country of origin. So there's a woman from Sierra Leone who used to live just a couple miles from me in Maryland, named Rabia Tukuyate, and she has been in the U.S. for 30 years. Her parents are here. Her parents became citizens. She was put on one of these flights. She has no criminal record. She was sent to Ghana. She's never been to Ghana. And then they physically forced her, and there's a horrible video. They physically forced her onto a bus, onto a plane, took her back to Sierra Leone, where she was tortured, 30 years ago. And so she's fled Sierra Leone again. She won't say what country she's in again, but she's in a neighboring country and just doesn't know what to do. And then if you go down to the next corner, in the southern part of Africa, is kind of the worst case scenario, and that's Eswatini. Eswatini is Africa's last absolute monarchy.
And it's
People there,
tiny,
it's a tiny country. I've actually been there. I lived in South Africa for a bit, and I did some reporting in Eswatini when I don't need to get into that story. Anyway, yeah. So what they've done is they've sent people to Eswatini on 3 different flights, 19 people. And these are people who did have serious convictions for serious crimes. But they had finished their sentences. And some of them had been out for years, up to 13 years, and had families, jobs, hadn't reoffended. Other people had been in ICE custody since their prison sentences had finished. Anyway, they sent these people to Eswatini, and they all had, withholding of removal orders, or their countries of origin refused to issue a travel document, so they couldn't be deported. So they sent them to Eswatini. Eswatini keeps them in a maximum security prison, even though they haven't been charged with any new crimes. And they're just kind of there. And the International Organization on Migration is trying to help them, but they're not really allowed a lot of access. They have a local attorney that they haven't been able to visit with. They can sometimes talk to their attorneys back in the US, but only if they're being monitored. And they're just sort of stuck there until they get a travel document. So only 2 people who have been sent to Eswatini have been released. One was this man, Orville Latoria from Jamaica, who was repatriated to Jamaica. And another was a Cambodian man who was repatriated just about a month and a half ago. But everyone else there is just kind of stuck. There are Cuban dissidents there. There are Yemenis stuck there. It's just awful.
How is any of this legal?
I mean, it isn't really. So there's this thing called the principle of non-refoulement. It's a U.S. and international law that just says you can't deport anybody to anywhere where they would be in danger. And that includes chain refoulement, deporting someone to a country that's just going to deport them to the place where they would be in danger. It is against U.S. and international law. There are a number of court cases that have been challenging this. Probably the most well-known is DVD versus DHS. So last May, in May of 2025, a federal judge, Brian Murphy in Boston, he did rule they were trying to send 7 men to South Sudan who weren't from there. And he did.
Place the United States government says no one should go to.
Right. And so the U.S. did it anyway, or, the Trump administration did it anyway. And he ruled, this has to stop. This was against the law. And then the Trump administration appealed it. And eventually in July of 2025, the Supreme Court said, we're going to do a big ruling on all of these. But in the meantime, Trump can keep doing this. And so we've just been waiting for the Supreme Court to rule on it overall. And in the meantime, Trump has continued to do this.
Right, so this was a shadow docket deal where the Supreme Court said, I mean, it's probably is illegal, but we're going to let Trump do it anyway.
Right. And Brian Murphy tried to rule again, I believe in January or February, to
Yep.
try and stop it. And an appeals court again said, nope, these can continue until the Supreme Court rules.
Yep.
So it is illegal. I don't know what to say.
Well, yeah, what you have to say is
Right.
we have a government that ignores the law and a Justice Department that's corrupt.
Correct.
Um, so I think just to put some numbers around this, you reported that Trump's made 34 agreements with other countries to do this. 19,000 people have been sent to 24 countries, and it's cost taxpayers $44 million.
Oh, more than $44 million. I mean, the 44 million is what we know of, and those are the payments to the actual countries. Those don't even
I
include the
see.
cost of
That's
the
not the cost.
flights.
It's just what we
The
paid.
flights are many more millions of
It's what we're
dollars.
paying the Eswatinis of the world to take.
Exactly.
Okay.
That we know of. So there are a lot of agreements that we don't know the terms of.
A lot of these people who are being sent are people whose cases, I'm going to use a word that you're going to have to help people understand, pre-terminated.
Mm. I mean,
Right? And that's but back because I want everybody to know what that actually means. So let's go back, explain what that is.
That's probably something that you saw in Third Country Deportation Watch, which
I
is
did.
Refugees International and Human Rights First that runs that. So that's not my site. We
I
have a
know.
lot of the same information, but
but I
they have
found them
more of
from
the
your
legal
site.
information.
Yeah.
And I'm not actually familiar with that term.
Okay, sorry.
So
I
I'm very
apologize.
sorry, but I can't help with
apologize.
that one.
What it means is that the Trump administration has ordered the Article 1 judges who work for Article 2 judges who work for the executive branch to simply terminate the cases before they have hearings.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
I mean, these are
That's
the
what it means.
asylum
So
seekers who are
I'm
waiting for
asylum
their
seeker.
hearings and then they just end it.
They end it. That's
Yeah.
what that means. So you're there, you're following all the rules, you've applied for asylum because you're in danger, you're doing what you're supposed to, and instead of having a hearing, they just say no
Right.
and put you on the plane.
Right. And I mean, there's just been, and this has just exploded, in the past year
Right,
of
look,
people who came here legally, who are absolutely, quote unquote, trying to do it the right way that we hear about and end up being sent to some country that they've never even been to.
yeah. Okay, so
I
we're
mean, there's an example we could talk about, which is Adriana Zapata. She came from Venezuela, where she was a victim of sexual violence. She was waiting for her asylum hearing, and she was sent to the Democratic Republic of Congo. She has a number of medical issues, including diabetes, and Congo said they couldn't handle her medical conditions. They tried to get the U.S. to take her back. A U.S. judge said she had to be brought back. And then, DOJ said, oh, well, we can't bring her back because of the Ebola outbreak. So that's their position right now. I mean, this is a whole other thing, but, one of the leading experts on medical evacuations and high risk evacuations is now a DHS contractor. So I think it's completely possible that ICE could bring her back safely without exposing anyone to Ebola. But that's their position right now.
you and I are out of time. Is it true you are about to launch a podcast?
Yeah, so there's this.
So plug it. Tell everybody about it.
Sure. It's going to be called Worst Airline Ever. We're shooting for Monday to launch it. You can support it at patreon.com/worst airline ever. And I'll be co-hosting it with a pretty well-known, although anonymous activist named JJ in DC, who also tracks a lot of ICE flights.
Well, look, your work's really important.
Thank you.
You have put your talents in a very dark place.
Yeah, tell me about it.
Yeah, so I just want to say that I hope you're okay doing it because it takes a toll.
I mean, I feel better doing it than not doing it. I would feel worse if I was doing nothing.
Yep. Well, none of us can do nothing right now. Thank you so much. Really appreciate your time. Nice
Thank you.
This conversation.
Welcome back to Edwin Eisendrath's It's the Democracy, Stupid on WCPT 820.
All right, everybody. I'm thrilled to welcome back after a break for paternity leave, really, Sam Levine, who is the Guardian's reporter covering things like voting rights and democracy. And he and I have been talking about the growing threat of tyranny for years in America and what to do about it. Sam, I'm so happy to talk to you again.
I'm happy to be here. Thanks, Edwin.
I remember our early conversations almost 5 years ago when we were developing, I guess, a framework to understand election attacks, because I had understood them as voter suppression. But then in the Trump era, we had to see sort of radical gerrymandering as a way to make sure votes don't matter, and post-election efforts to undermine the actual counting, whether that's refusing to certify results or casting doubt on legitimacy. And now I see experts preparing for seized ballot boxes and other truly egregious attacks. Where do things actually stand?
Well, I think there's definitely a serious level of concern about interference from the federal government in the election this year. This was definitely a concern in 2024, but President Trump obviously wasn't in power then. But the administration has signaled that they have no qualms about using the investigative power, the law enforcement power of the Department of Justice to launch baseless investigations, to seize election materials, and to really question and undermine elections. So there is a very serious and heightened level of concern.
Okay, well, that's like terrifying. How are people fighting back? How do you protect yourselves against this? How are states doing that?
Well, I think there's a very aggressive effort to push back on these claims. If you look at what's happened in Fulton County, Georgia, where the Justice Department has seized ballots related to the 2020 election, the county has very aggressively sought in court to get the ballots returned. There's been efforts to unseal the search warrants and search warrant affidavits that were used to justify that seizure. Once those were unsealed, it was pretty clear that, it was based on debunked conspiracy theories that weren't the underlying evidence for seizing the ballots wasn't really serious, credible evidence. And, it was astonishing that an FBI agent would sign off on such claims and that a magistrate judge would approve them because so many of the claims had been investigated and debunked. So an effort to really aggressively push back against these things, to point out that, they're based on debunked conspiracy theories, and to use every avenue, legally available to try and stop these things. And I think there's lots of preparations already underway, gaming out scenarios, preparing lawsuits, things like that for the November elections.
And what does the Supreme Court's quick approval of Alabama's, I'm going to call them racist maps because that's what the judges found, mean for election integrity generally, not just in Alabama, but going forward?
Well, I think what happened in Alabama is a real signal that the Supreme Court has taken all limits off of gerrymandering, whether it's partisan gerrymandering or, dividing up voters based on race. And, this Alabama redrew its map to revert back to a map that they, essentially a map that they enacted after the 2020 census that only gave Black voters a majority in one of the 7 congressional districts in the state. And, it's It's an obvious and blunt effort to deny Black voters in Alabama the ability to elect the candidate of their choosing. There's overwhelming evidence in Alabama established through years of litigation, several trials, court hearings, briefings that showed that the maps in Alabama were drawn intentionally to diminish the influence of Black voters. And the Supreme Court has, said essentially that that's okay, that the standard for proving, what you need to prove to get a map like that struck down is now so high that it's impossible. Alabama has done that. Louisiana has also done something similar. Tennessee obviously redrew its maps. And I think, it's not the same kind of, bluntly, overtly, visually striking things that we saw in the civil rights movement, like, people being asked to count how many jelly beans are in a jar, things like that. But it is a very ugly and obvious effort to make it harder for Black people to elect the candidate that they want. It makes it hard, if not impossible, for Black voters to translate their political preferences into representation. And that's very, very alarming and very, very scary.
And the Supreme Court, they said the 14th Amendment still holds, but we have no way of figuring out what that means, which is, again, so incredibly shocking, 15th Amendment. But I want to ask you something else, because, the way you describe this, clearly racially discriminatory, but on its face, not partisan in the sense of any party could do this terrible thing. But the Supreme Court also had this principle called Purcell, which said don't mess with an election close to the election. And in the same case 2 years ago, they said, oh, no, you can't put in maps that aren't racist this close to the election. Stay with the old maps. And then in this election, they imposed the racist maps while the election was already underway. There's no way the timing can be seen as anything other than partisan, can it?
Right. I mean, the Purcell principle is something that's not law. It's not in the Constitution, obviously. It's a idea or an approach that the Supreme Court has invented really over the last 20 years that basically says when an election is close, federal courts shouldn't intervene and upend the status quo. And it has been used over and over against voting rights litigants. Basically, when they win a decision in a lower court, the state defendants always rush to the Supreme Court and they, create some argument that, in my opinion, is pretextual a lot of the time, where they say, there's some deadline near, whether that's, the deadline for candidate qualifying or something like that, is near, but the actual election is still months away. And they say the election's so close, we can't impose a new map. It would cause chaos. And the Supreme Court over and over again has bought that argument and used it to deny relief from discriminatory maps and other, discriminatory voting procedures. In Alabama, just to get at what you were referencing, 4 or 5 years ago, this case came to the Supreme Court on a preliminary injunction, and it was in February. The Alabama primary was in May, I think, and the Supreme Court in February said it was too close to the election to impose a new map in Alabama. And obviously there's a lot of time between February and May. And this year, when Alabama wanted to impose a new map days before its election, Alabama canceled its primary, moved its election, got the new map in place, and the Supreme Court said, we have absolutely no problem with that, or didn't really address it. And I think it just really shows inconsistent application of this principle certainly creates a perception that the Supreme Court only uses this to benefit Republicans. And the justices, in my opinion, haven't really offered a convincing, thorough explanation of why they're behaving this way.
Right, which invites people like me to give a convincing and thorough explanation of their partisanship and their bigotry and a long standing effort to erase voting rights in the United States and to favor a different kind of smaller democracy where some people matter more than others. And I guess if they don't want to answer for themselves, that's the answer the rest of us are going to give. Sam, I wonder if you have any thoughts or reporting that gets at the complaints about the way votes are counted in Los Angeles. Los Angeles is, of course, a very Democratic city, and so it's not a really great surprise that a Republican candidate didn't make the runoff in a race. The top two contenders ended up being Democrats. That kind of makes sense in a big Democratic city, but there's all this talk now about vote fraud, again, from the president, from Speaker Johnson, whose quote, I think, Sam, was, "Oh, it's so nefarious you can't see the evidence, therefore there's vote fraud." I mean, I don't, what's that fight about and where's it going?
Yeah, I think that's really concerning, and I think it's really a rehash of what we saw in 2020, which is that when jurisdictions take a while to count votes, it creates this information vacuum that leaves room for actors to claim fraud when there is none. So, in California, they take a long time to count their ballots, and there's a policy reason for that. They have determined that they think it's the best policy for everyone to receive a mail-in ballot. They have determined it's the best policy to give voters as long as possible. They can return a ballot up until Election Day. And then, it takes them a while to verify those ballots, to make sure that voters are eligible, review signatures, things like that. And that takes time. And, it's unfortunate, I think, that we live in a time when, there's a demand to know the winner of an election, like immediately, the second after the polls close. And that just doesn't happen in California. They've set up their system in a way that it takes longer. And the trade-off, if you talk to California election officials, would say that the trade-off is that it ensures that every last person who wants to cast a vote, whether they want to vote a week before Election Day or, 1 second before the polls close, that they are entitled to do that. The president and allies and people like Mike Johnson have warped that into something saying that the fact that we don't know the election results immediately and that the election results can change as ballots count or more ballots are counted, that's totally normal. The election result that's reported the second after the polls close isn't always the final election result. They've warped that to say that's some evidence that something is wrong. And, I think that that's something we should expect to see more of in November. There's going to be more places in California that might take a few days to count their ballots to know who the winner is, and that's totally normal. But I think it continues to show that there needs to be a really concerted effort to pre-butt those claims, to explain to voters why there's a delay, what exactly is going on. Otherwise, it's going to leave a total vacuum for people to claim fraud. And, in Los Angeles, what's so concerning is that you have the U.S. attorney there, the representative of the Justice Department, essentially going out publicly. He went on Glenn Beck's podcast earlier this week and said, we are going to bring claims of fraud without offering any evidence of what that is. So I think that's just an example of how, it's one thing to make these claims, but it's another thing now that the Trump administration is in power, that they can really take it to a new level with their investigative authority.
Yeah, I'm going to get to the Justice Department in 1 second, but before, I want to stick with the language you used. It's so interesting. You were really clear that this takes time because of all the things that the election officials are doing after the votes are cast to make sure they're legitimate, to make sure that people have the right to vote, to make sure ballots aren't counted that should not be counted. In other words, it takes time to have an election that has no fraud, right? You have to, and yet the language we use is it takes time to count the vote. Whereas what they're really doing is they're counting for sure, but they're also taking the time to verify and check the eligibility of voters. And I wonder in this moment whether our language has to change to reflect those extra steps, which should be obvious, but because we're not saying them, we're leaving room for the nefarious actors to pretend that we're doing something else.
Right. I think there's a lot of confusion about the way that election results are reported. It's not clear to someone who's just, casually watching why the results change. And, I think it's a serious conversation that honestly is more of a media issue, because the media is the one that's, reporting the results about how they can best convey to voters that results might change while also giving them information about where things stand, because I don't think it's realistic to not say anything about election results until there's a projected winner. The demand and interest is too high, but there needs to be a way to convey that we can expect the results to change and why that happens. And I think there's been a lot of progress on that since 2020. Just because that was such an issue then, but definitely there is more work to do on that.
All right. So now let me turn to Justice Department, because you said, and I don't think I knew this, that the U.S. Attorney in Southern California says he's going to bring a fraud case. I'm so upset at the words fail me. See, prosecutors are supposed to find evidence of a crime, and then they can bring a case. But these guys go politically saying, here's a place where I can pretend there's a crime. And I live in Chicago, where we just had a huge scandal with the U.S. attorney cheating with a grand jury. All the cases, and now even further sets of cases, are being thrown out and revisited because they lied to grand juries, they manipulated grand juries, they abused the process, they hid key evidence. These are things that you expect you certainly don't expect in a functioning democracy with a functioning Justice Department. So did the U.S. Attorney in California say, oh, here's evidence of a crime, we're now going to figure out who committed it? Or did they just say, we're going to find a crime?
I think it was more vague, closer to the latter. But they've suggested that there was a crime without, filing a case or offering any evidence of that.
Yeah.
Usually it works the opposite way. There's evidence of a crime, and then you determine if there's enough to file a criminal case.
Yeah, and who committed the crime. All that stuff is what detectives and investigators and the FBI do. All right. So what does the elevation of Todd Blanche mean for the rule of law and for election integrity?
I think Todd Blanche, before he was at the Justice Department, was the president's personal attorney And since arriving at the Justice Department, both as the Deputy Attorney General and the Acting Attorney General, has been remarkably effective in carrying out the president's wishes and has made it very clear that he has no qualms about using the department to carry out, retribution against the president's enemies. And I think it essentially shows that there is no separation between the Justice Department, and it's really just become an extension of the White House. And, very, very alarming. There's serious damage that, the nation's most powerful law enforcement agency can do to an individual or an organization. And Todd Blanche has shown no qualms about deploying that power on behalf of the president. I would expect very little pushback from the Justice Department on anything that the president wants to do.
All the more important for the states to do their job. Wow. This week, I'm going to change the subject a little, but unfortunately, I think they're related. The Democrats blocked the short-term extension of an important provision of the FISA law, that's foreign surveillance laws. You wrote about that. Can you just explain the reasoning behind it?
I haven't been covering that, actually.
I'm sorry.
Super familiar.
I apologize. I thought I read that was you. Once again, this is my bad. All right, let me go. What are the stories that you're covering right now that are most focused on the integrity of our elections?
One story I've been covering very closely is what's happening with the slush fund and efforts to compensate allies of the president, January 6th defendants, and the Justice Department would love to say that they have said this is dead, it's not moving forward, but have left a little bit of wiggle room to try and revive it in the future, and sort of unclear what's going to happen with that. But obviously, the Justice Department doling out nearly $1.8 billion in taxpayer funds to allies of the president is not the way that taxpayer funds should be spent, or the Justice Department is supposed to work. So I think that's something that continue to follow very closely.
There are two court cases that I've been watching. One of them was the one that got reopened, where they reopened the underlying litigation because the judge wants to know whether it was a fraudulent deal. And this also includes, of course, permanent immunity for Trump and only for anything related to tax fraud.
Right.
But the other case, I think was it just yesterday or the day before, a judge said, don't play possum in my courtroom. I'm not going to do anything because you say this is dead. And then later in the day, there was reporting that in fact, it really isn't dead. I can't imagine the judges are happy with the way the Justice Department is behaving in their courtrooms.
Yeah, I mean, and the other development on that is just this morning on Friday that a judge in Virginia blocked the fund and said that she would lift her injunction if the Justice Department and the Treasury Department signed an affidavit, under penalty of perjury, confirming that the fund was blocked. So I think that we are seeing some skepticism, at least from some judges, that this fund is really permanently blocked.
Yeah, I mean, have you ever seen a time when the federal court when the federal government goes to court where judges distrust them as they do now?
Not the way that they are now. I think they face hard questions, but there is generally what's called presumption of regularity, that when the government makes a representation to court that it's true and accurate. And I think that judges, that credibility is totally lost, and judges are not giving the government the benefit of the doubt and are now taking even a step further to, sanction them in cases where they've misrepresented things or lied about things to a court.
Well, Sam, I know that you have to go because you have a breaking story. Is there one thing you see that voters can take comfort from? Maybe there's not.
I think it's, I think one thing is that people are responding to what's happening with redistricting and not letting it go unnoticed. You had hearings in the South. And as states were redrawing the map, where voters were waiting for hours to testify. And, I think there's genuine, frustration about this. And that, to me, suggests that this is not something that is going to hold long term, that something is going to have to change about it. And so I think, it might take a while, but it's not something that I think is going to hold long term.
All right, everybody. Just as a reminder, this is Sam Levine. He's a fabulous reporter. He's been paying attention to things that now everybody knows are important, and he was paying attention before anybody thought this could be a problem in the United States. Thank you so much for your time. As always, it's great to catch up. Thanks so much for having me, Edwin. Anytime.
Welcome back to Edwin Eisendrath's It's the Democracy, Stupid, on WCPT 820.
Okay, everybody, welcome back. I am thrilled to be joined again by the intrepid editor of the Ohio Capital Journal, David DeWitt. David, welcome back.
Hey, Edwin. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. It's nice to talk to you.
It's been a little while, and in the interim, is it possible that the good people of your state just might end the reign of the power brokers who've robbed taxpayers, ignored the state constitution, lined the pockets of donors, and generally made a mess of everything from public education to your state's economy? I mean, the sun seems to be shining over Ohio.
Wow. It's certainly possible. Yeah, I would say from the perspective of the Ohio Democratic Party, they are looking at their biggest opportunity since 2006. And 2006 was the year that Sherrod Brown was first elected to the U.S. Senate. It was the year that Ted Strickland won the governorship of Ohio, and Rich Cordray won Attorney General. Jennifer Brunner won Secretary of State. Rich Cordray won Treasurer. Mark Dan won Attorney General. But anyway, it was the last time that Democrats won statewide executive offices in Ohio. And it's when Sherrod Brown beat Mike DeWine, actually, for the U.S. Senate. So I would say it's the best chance that the Ohio Democrats have in 20 years.
Yeah, I think I agree with you. It's good for Democrats, but it's good for leaving aside the partisan side of it, the people of Ohio have not been able to find their voice because of gerrymandering, because of, the just sort of strange behavior of a government that's like using Ohio tax dollars to keep a coal plant in Indiana going and stuff like that. It's sort of like the people of Ohio finally said enough.
Well, yeah, there's certainly some strong indications of that. And you're right that, really it's not a partisan thing. From a good government perspective, it might be times for some actual accountability, because we've seen numerous scandals that have cost billions of dollars, some of them more than $1 billion, others hundreds of millions of dollars. We've seen a lot of corruption, a lot of pay-to-play corruption, and just abuse of government office against small d democracy and against the power of the people, and some real unethical abuses of the power of elected office in Ohio. And maybe it's time for some accountability, and that would be the people standing up for themselves and actually asserting the fact that this is their government, this is our government, and just saying that they want to see things done differently.
Yeah, I mean, and the people of Ohio have stood up for themselves by passing state constitutional amendments to end gerrymandering, but somehow the gerrymandered state legislature found a way to ignore it. And I just think your voters are finally saying, we just will not take this anymore.
Well, yeah, and I think that's part of the pattern that has led to such mass voter frustration, because voters have taken, matters into their own hands, whether it's gerrymandering or the reproductive rights constitutional amendment or the marijuana law.
Or protecting the amendment process itself. Yeah.
Right. And they've taken to the ballot and they've said, we're going to assert our control and our power here. And repeatedly, they've seen themselves challenged, ignored, or outright insulted by the statewide elected leaders. On the issue of gerrymandering, they just totally ignored the voters. They basically stuck their middle finger in the voters' faces and said, no, we're going to do what we want anyway, and you're going to have to deal with it. You're still going to suffer gerrymandering, and we don't care what you voted for, even though it was 75% of you that voted against gerrymandering. And then they abused their office to manipulate the ballot language for further anti-gerrymandering reform. They overturned the voter-passed marijuana law to take away the money and where the voters put the revenue and take the revenue for themselves, and to criminalize various aspects the voters had decriminalized. They still continue to introduce legislation that challenges the voter-passed reproductive rights amendment. So I think when you see this pattern of the state being arrogant, being insulting to the voters, being condescending, saying the voters didn't understand what they're doing and we're going to come in here and fix it, I think that it rubs voters the wrong way, absolutely.
Yeah,
and
again,
when you see
not
it
a
happen
partisan
repeatedly
issue.
like this, yeah.
I mean, it is partisan in that the Republicans are doing it, but but the response isn't partisan. The response includes a lot of people who used to call themselves Republicans. There's just people are fed up with being taken for granted.
Oh, for sure. And I think they just see it's not what government's supposed to. Our government is supposed to be the people. The people is supposed to be representative of the people and supposed to be putting the people first. And when the people see politicians putting themselves first, and they're obviously not putting the people's interests first, and they're obviously overturning the will of the people to put their own lust for power first, I think it flies in the face fundamentally, intuitively for most people, for everything this nation's supposed to be about. And so I think there's an incredible amount of frustration there.
And yet the Republicans in your state aren't done trying to bend the rules. I mean, I understand they want voters to approve a new constitutional amendment on changing the voter ID requirements to make it harder to vote.
Yeah, and so this is just part and part. First of all, this is something that the lawmakers can introduce constitutional amendment proposals themselves. So they made it much harder for voters to do so, and they can do so at will. And every election cycle, they introduce something. They've done it with cash bail reform in the past, even though cash bail, it was already a consideration for judges, but so it's duplicative anyway. But they choose these issues that they think will juice turnout, and they put those on the ballot as just kind of an extra energizer for their base. This year, it's voter ID. They've already passed voter ID in Ohio. That's been the law. They're putting it forward as a constitutional amendment. It's duplicative. In some ways, it's worse than the current law that's on the books. So they're making it harder on voters. They're setting things up to be worse and harder. But essentially, it's duplicative anyway. And it's going to be kind of weird for Ohio voters in November to have to show their ID to vote and then go vote on whether they should show their ID to vote. I don't know what people will make of that. But obviously, the issue pulls well. They've spent a lot of time the last 6 years since 2020 fostering this idea, this false idea
Yeah.
that American elections are rife with voter fraud, which they are not. It's
not.
like 0.0005% in Ohio. Is a ridiculously small number.
Well, hang on about that.
Frank
About
LaRose,
that.
yeah.
About that. I just want to stop and say, what the hell? Kash Patel's FBI agents are raiding the offices of something called the Ohio Organizing Collaborative, chasing down its board members, confiscating phones and laptops. The Ohio Organizing Collaborative, this must be, and I got to ask you because I'm not familiar with it, it must be like a huge criminal organization that's been laundering money and putting drugs in the state and selling children into prostitution. I mean, they must have really gone after like a big crime syndicate here.
Yeah, nobody really knows what to make of this, but there are some really critically important questions that need to be answered immediately by people in power with regard to this right now. So, Ohio Organizing Collaborative, they're basically just voter registration, good government, pro-worker.
So they're none of the things I just said, right?
None of those things.
None.
Anti-corporation, nonprofit group, right? They register to people to vote. They stand up for labor and workers. They fight corporations.
They register people to vote in a state where, as you pointed out, there's like 0.00005% of like anybody ever voting when they shouldn't. Yeah.
Of actual prosecutable voter fraud, right?
Yep. So
they're just a statewide nonprofit focused on voter registration and voter rights. What happened on Thursday that we know is that they've said that the FBI came to their staffers' homes, their offices in multiple cities, and in some cases they say the FBI confiscated electronic devices, laptops, maybe phones, stuff like that. We obviously they condemned these searches. There are various Democratic politicians in Ohio, such as the Congresswoman from that area, from Cleveland area, Shontel Brown, Amelia Sykes from Akron, candidate Sherrod Brown, the Brennan Center for Justice nationally have all come out in their defense and said that this is unprecedented. This is an assault on small d democracy. This is intimidation. What we have no idea that the FBI has not said is what they are alleged to have done. We don't know what the accusations are. We don't know what the suspicions are. We don't know what's being investigated. Now, typically, that would be found in an affidavit that has to come along with a search warrant that would be signed by a judge for any of these property confiscations and search executions to take place, because, in America, theoretically, we have the rule of law, and a execution of a search requires a warrant signed by a judge with an accompanying affidavit, which would spell out whatever accusations or what they're on the search for, what they're trying to figure out. Now, we don't know if that's been filed. So we need to find that out. That's question number one. Where's the affidavit? Where's the search warrant? And if there is none, then that creates a lot of big problems and questions. And so that means that the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Northern District of Ohio needs to answer questions. The FBI needs to answer questions. The Governor of Ohio needs to answer questions, Mike DeWine. I would say J.D. Vance, as a former senator of Ohio and the vice president, needs to answer questions. The Attorney General, both of our senators, John Husted and Bernie Moreno, need to answer questions. This situation needs to be figured out, and people in power need to find out what's going on. And if there is an investigation or if there are accusations, the FBI needs to say what it is. And if there's not a search warrant or an affidavit or the rule of law is not being followed, the people deserve to know why the rule of law is not being followed if it's not. So there's a lot to figure out here.
I mean, the Ohio Organizing Collaborative, these aren't rich and powerful people doing anything, right? This is very
It's
grassroots,
mostly
isn't it?
minority vote. It's mostly minority voter registration efforts, as far as I know.
Yeah. So in the United States, let's see, we can hide the Jeffrey Epstein files. We can move Ghislaine Maxwell, convicted of of facilitating the abuse of all these young women, to a country club and give her a dog. Um, but if you're organizing in the community and you are registering black voters, we're going to send the FBI after you. That's the message.
I mean, that is what certainly they're saying. That's what the Brennan Center for Justice is saying, and I think that's the big fear among a lot of people. Yeah.
I mean, David, a week or 2 weeks after the Supreme Court said, no, we don't have to let blacks have fair representation in on the Voting Rights Act, doesn't mean that. And states in the South, like Alabama, are imposing districts that courts have found to be racist. Now, a week later, you're going after black voter registration in Ohio. This is an ugly, ugly pattern.
It's yet another unprecedented extreme escalation and radicalism toward something that is fundamentally un-American in that it doesn't seem to be following the traditional rule of law.
Right. Okay. So with that as background, we are now through the primaries and we're heading to a general election. So just let's talk about the races. You have a governor's race. To remind everybody who's running, because we've certainly heard of the Republican candidate. I don't know that everybody knows the good doctor. The people who listen to this show know the lieutenant governor campaign because David Pepper's been a guest on this show so many times. So to talk about that race.
Yeah, so another big notable thing about this year's election in Ohio is that all of our offices, our statewide executive offices, are term limited. So everybody is not able to run for reelection. So every office is open, including the governor's office. And we haven't had an open governor's race like this since 2018. So we have Vivek Ramaswamy, the tech entrepreneur on the Republican side, who was kind of coronated very early by the Ohio Republican Party with an endorsement in May of 2025. And that cleared the path without much of a primary opposition from established people like Attorney General Dave Yost dropped out of the race. Although he did face a primary from his extreme right in the form of Casey Putsch, who did some pretty dog whistle type stuff during the campaign, was pretty overt about courting the most extreme far right. And he ended up getting about 150,000 votes, which matters actually because in a tight race, that kind of opposition to Ramaswamy by the Republican far right might end up being significant for him. On the Democratic side, we have Dr. Amy Acton, who was Republican Governor Mike DeWine's director of the Department of Health in 2020 and the early part of his administration, which happened to coincide with the pandemic, obviously. She did resign from that position in 2020 due to some disagreements she had with the way the administration was handling some of the things. But she made a name for herself during that time, doing the daily press conferences every afternoon with Mike DeWine and being kind of a calm, scientific medical voice each day for Ohioans that period. She's kind of teased runs for elected office after that, but eventually decided to run for Ohio governor. She also announced her candidacy fairly early, and the Democrats in Ohio presented a united front by not really having any sort of primary challenge against her. So she's been able to build up her candidacy for a while as well. So what's interesting about the race is that it's two people who have never held elected office before. Neither of them have been so much as county dog warden, and they're both running for the highest executive office in Ohio. So you have that, and you can see some of their figuring things out that some other politicians might already know along the way. But it makes it, I think, is one of the most heavily watched races in the country, because Ramaswamy and his presence in 2024 and that Republican presidential primary, and then in the Doge cluster at the early Trump administration. And then also, like, he's not a very strong candidate at all. He's made significant gaffes, and I think the Republican Party took Ohio for granted, and it looks like they're actually in a fight here for that in Ohio. And so it's a pretty heavily watched race.
Yeah, that's very exciting, because everything about your state could change if the Republicans lose control of the governor's mansion, for sure.
Yeah, it would be, the legislature would still be gerrymandered, and it would be a fight for over legislation for sure still, but there would be a lot of administrative stuff that she would be able to do. No doubt, and not least of which would be just basic transparency and accountability that we haven't seen in Ohio in a long time.
Yes, and as we saw in Wisconsin with Tony Evers, the first step to ending a gerrymander is having a governor who will stand up to it, as opposed to one who. Because the governor's seat does the governor does have it. It wouldn't happen until 2031, so it would have to be a re-election thing. But just as a reminder to all listeners, on the Ohio Redistricting Commission, the governor, the auditor, and the Secretary of State sit. So those three seats are incredibly important. And three of the current office holders, like our current Secretary of State, Frank LaRose, who has a long history of pretty blatant hostility toward Ohio voters. He's trying to become auditor, which would retain him a seat on the Ohio Redistricting Commission, and he would still be able to participate in that. And then current treasurer Robert Sprague is trying to become Ohio Secretary of State, so that the Republican side is trying to play musical chairs with statewide offices with all the down ballots. That's interesting too. And the Democrats, are they new faces vying for those jobs?
Yeah. Except for Allison Russo, who's the former Democratic leader of the Ohio House. She's running for Secretary of State, so she's not new. She's pretty well known, at least in Columbus. I don't know how well known she is throughout. She's never run for or won statewide office before, but she was a leader in the legislature.
So interesting. Well, I'm all for Dr. Pepper. It's a ticket I like.
Dr. Pepper, yes, indeed. Yeah, and David Pepper is Dr. Amy Acton's running mate, and he ran for auditor and attorney general. He was the chair of the Ohio Democratic Party for a number of years. He's an author of books. He's a pretty well-known quantity here in Ohio.
Yeah. Okay, so that's the governor's race. You have a nationally important Senate race.
Yeah, and that one, Sabato's crystal ball recently moved that toward Democratic favor more. That, along with Alaska, it's still, most of the prognosticators are saying that it's still, out there whether the Democrats can win control over the U.S. Senate. But Alaska, Ohio are very, very important races for Democrats in that pursuit. If they are to win control over the U.S. Senate, it will surely probably have to include Ohio, which is why,
how's that race going? I mean, Sherrod Brown was a senator. He then lost his seat. Now he's running again. In time of generational shift, he's a little on the older side of the crop of candidates we're running around the country. So how's his candidacy being received?
I mean, he's polling better than Acton is. Acton and Ramaswamy are polling within the margin of error, basically. Sherrod's polling even better than Acton. He's pulling ahead of Husted. So it's early. It's still early summer here, but he's looking strong. Husted wanted to be governor. He got appointed to the Senate after J.D. Vance became vice president. The path had already been cleared for Ramaswamy. He couldn't have challenged him. So I'm not sure how much he loves being a senator anyway. I'm sure he's trying to win re-election and everything, but it wasn't the goal or career path that I think that he ever had in mind anyway. But regardless, he's got his name all involved in a lot of the scandals that have been in Ohio around utilities over the recent years. He's kind of not really stood out in any particular way as a senator so far. So he's got a tough re-election race here. Ohio, obviously, like, you always got to weigh it a little bit toward the Republicans because that's how we've been since 2016. But
Yep.
Sherrod Brown has the best name recognition of any Ohio Democrat by far. This is Ohioans, especially even Ohioans without college degrees in the rural areas, are supremely souring on Trump. The Cook political report, Charlie Cook wrote a blog or something just this past week. You can look it up online for anyone interested. But it's worth reading because he uses a Fox News poll to show that Republicans they should be having some anxiety over Ohio. And he talks about the Sherrod Brown-John Husted race, and it's worth a read because Charlie Cook is one of the most respected prognosticators in Washington. So.
That's interesting. It's really interesting. I mean, we've talked for, I don't know, you and I, 5 years about Ohio, and sometimes it feels like it's the land democracy forgot, but the people there keep fighting for it. They keep fighting for it. They keep getting up and going back at it. And it's a beautiful thing. And I've looked at what's happened all around the Great Lakes as first Michigan and then Wisconsin shrugged off their gerrymanders and started to move forward again. And Ohio was always this, the one that was like, could it happen there? And it looks like there's a chance now.
There is a chance. There's a chance. The people can assert their power and their freedom this election if they want to. I'm not, I always, and maybe it's my jaded journalist side, but I always just kind of take a skeptical approach to see what might happen. That way, if anything really positive happens for the people, I can be surprised and happy. But I was at the Columbus Arts Festival earlier this morning, and I met some people who were passing out petitions, and I can't sign petitions as a journalist, but they recognized the Capital Journal, and I talked to them, and it made me think of something. Sometimes people ask me where I look to for hope, and I always say it's not the politicians, that's for sure, with all their lies and their cynicism. It's the people. I know that there are thousands of people across the state and every community. There's so many people out there just trying to do the right thing and to be honest and to help their communities and to help other people. And those are the ones who inspire me. And I think that when they decide to collectively take action, they really can, change the world and change the state of Ohio and change whatever they want to change. So I always take inspiration from that.
That is where we should end because that's beautiful. But I got to ask you one more question, and I'm going to apologize in advance. Your incredibly partisan Supreme Court seems to be undermining public records laws in Ohio now. And that's just, what does that mean for journalism and democracy in the state?
Well, yeah, and that kind of goes back to what, that power of the people. There's this line from James Madison that is, a people who mean to be their own self-governors must arm themselves with the power which knowledge gives. A popular government without popular knowledge is but a prelude to a tragedy or a farce, or perhaps both. And the role of journalism is to arm the people with the power of knowledge. The Republicans, unfortunately, made our Supreme Court openly partisan by adding party labels. So our Republican Ohio Supreme Court decided to protect the Republican Ohio Attorney General from the sunshine of public scrutiny and how much he might have been mixing his public office with political activities. And so they shut down the transparency on that. And when it comes to the power of the people, really what journalism is doing is trying to shine the spotlight. We're trying to share knowledge and truth however we can find it and give people good information so that they can make responsible citizenship, decisions as voters, as petitioners, or what have you. So when the courts step in and they close off sunshine and they close off transparency, it's not just an insult to journalism and journalists. It's an insult to the people themselves. It's an insult to accountability over government and transparency. Now, we could argue all day long about whatever people believe about certain policy issues, but transparency and accountability is fundamental to a healthy democracy, and everybody should agree that government, they're spending our money, they're making decisions in our name. We need public scrutiny. They work for us. They're public servants. We need accountability. We need transparency. We need public scrutiny.
Yep.
And
that's true in Ohio as it is in the federal government, where Mr. Trump wants everybody to sign non-disclosures so they can't be whistleblowers. It is a disease right now and very antithetical to our ideas of democracy. Well, but I am sure, David, that no matter what this government in Ohio does to limit your ability to find out what's going on, you are going to find out what's going on. Because good journalists find a way, and you guys have been remarkable.
Thank you, Edwin. That's very kind of you. Thank you.
Well, thanks for joining me today, and I really appreciate it. Good luck out there.
Yeah, pleasure to talk to you, as always. Take good care. Thanks again.
Bye. All right, everybody, we'll take a quick break and your calls when we come back.
Welcome back to Edwin Eisendrath's It's the Democracy, Stupid, on WCPT 820.
All right, say this with me, everybody. 773-763-9278. 773-763-9278. Call that number and let's have a conversation, starting, of course, with Jim.
Hi, Edwin. This week, Tom Homan, that Honest Abe of the ICE agency, said that face recognition, he could tell at Delaney prison that these people were coming from different states because he's on that face recognition just like a bulldog on a meat truck. I mean, he knows every face that's out there protesting. That's how crazy it is. But think of it this way. Now, if I was an immigrant or a refugee, let's say I ignored the Statue of Liberty and I came to the United States, all right? But I was on the lam or whatever the case might be. It's at the point now you cannot even tell your religious leader where you're at, what your address is, because no one in this Justice Department is going to protect you. They've lost the impetus to protect anybody's rights. I mean, that's what the real bugger is. I mean, my goodness, you think of it. Let's say I do say I'm going to go legally, and I came from wherever, and I'm going to go. Maybe I'll go legal. But you go in there, and the next thing you know, you're in irons, and you're on your way to Sri Lanka. I mean, come on. I mean, nobody in their right mind would even. It's defeating the purpose. That's my point. The whole thing is defeating the purpose of this. And we're living in a think of it. They know just about where you're at, what you're doing, and everything else. With all the nonsense they got, you can't tell me they can't improve on this system. I mean, this is insane the way this is working. I don't know. What do you think? I mean, I don't know. You think we're in the, this is 2026. You think that they would have, a better system than this? What do you think of the system?
The technology, the incredible advances of technology should be put to helping us be more prosperous and more free. The Trump administration is, as China has done, using this technology to perfect their tyranny. Right? It's absolutely abhorrent. They can be stopped by Congress. And in fact, Congress has this week, for the first time, in a bit of a bipartisan way, showed a little spine. One of the most important tools the government has in counterterrorism work is in the FISA law. And it is the part that allows them to basically listen in on foreign nationals' phone calls, to see if they're spying. But sometimes that catches the Americans who are talking to them. And
Yeah.
the Congress so distrusted Donald Trump's nominee to be his appointment of a guy named Pulte to be the acting head of national intelligence, that they let the law expire. They said, no, we're not going to extend it until we get this straightened out. So I think people are terrified of what Donald Trump is doing with intelligence against Americans, and even Republicans.
Of course. And the point is, when we get the House back and we get some intelligent people in there, they have to look at this, even the whole FISA thing since 9/11, look at this more seriously. What are we spending on this immigration effort? I mean, they got another $70 billion. To my count, it's almost $300 billion. They had $210 billion to start with. Now they got another $70 billion for this Holman. But it'll take $50,000. What will he do with $70 billion? God only knows. But the point is, look at the money we're spending on this insanity. And there's got to be a better system than this. You can almost give these immigrants a couple $100,000 apiece and let them live in the Four Seasons for a couple of weeks. Anyway, Edwin, great show as usual, and thanks for taking my call, Edwin. Thank you.
Yeah, of course, Jim. Thank you. All right, 773-763-9278. Dave.
Hey, Edwin. Been a while again. You see, where Trump had been talking about taking Carg Island, I was reading an article. It says, where experts say the U.S. would need at least 1,200 troops to take Carg Island. Whether or not that number would be enough to hold the island is less clear. Given the size of Carg Island, which sits roughly 15 miles from the Iranian coast, taking it would likely require a reinforced battalion up to a brigade-sized force of between 1,200 and 4,000 U.S. troops, and said retired Army General Joseph Votel, who led U.S. Central Command from 2016 to 2019. The specific task to be accomplished will actually drive the size of the force, Votel said. Sustaining U.S. troops on Carg Island would require support, including air cover, logistics, and engineering and evacuation capabilities. Carg Island is about 8 square miles large and has a population of about 8,000 permanent residents. And it's worth noting that a Marine Expeditionary Unit brings with it a reinforced infantry battalion of about 1,200 Marines, and amphibious seizure operations are a core capability of that unit. Holding it might require more than that, depending on how much of a threat the 8,000 Iranian residents might pose. And any force the U.S. might put on the island would likely face a steady threat of attacks by air and would require constant air defense. Taking the island would be less risky than holding it. To hold it for any length of time, the U.S. military also would have to suppress Iranian weapons that could be used to strike it. And U.S. military operations to capture Carg Island would require more forces and involve more risk than the Special Operations mission in January. And lastly, assuming insertion goes well, actually maintaining a sustainable presence and resupplying the forces on the island would be difficult and potentially risky for U.S. service personnel. And the only reason Trump wants it is Carg Island is 90% of Iran's oil is sent to Carg Island. There would have been other couple islands that are a bit closer. But,
I'm glad you brought that up. For all the reasons that you cited here, it would be an incredibly difficult, incredibly costly operation for Americans to achieve. I think we could achieve it at great cost, but the reason Donald Trump wants to do it, I mean, how stupid is he? He said we'd be rich, we'd be rich, we'd be so rich. But just, what he doesn't understand is it isn't that isn't where the oil comes from. The Iranians pipe the oil there to put it on ships. They'll just turn off the pipe on the mainland, and they won't be pouring oil into American ships on Karg Island. I
Right.
mean, he would risk hundreds of American lives, millions of
Oh,
dollars,
it'd be
to take this rock because he thinks he's going to be making himself, rich with the oil that we
of
steal
course.
from there. But it's BS. They'll just turn off the pipe.
Right.
It's entirely nonsense.
Right. And they
This is where we are, and we're there. We're there. Excuse me, Dave. We're there
no.
because these terrible people have gotten rid of anyone who will tell them the truth. Like the
Yeah.
Defense Department, they fired everybody of talent so that they would all just bow down to Pete Hegseth and say, "Yes, sir,
Oh.
whatever you want, sir." And they
Mhm.
just don't. I mean, my God, the danger that they have brought to the whole world with their stupidity.
And they thought that that these the protesters and stuff would have brought up arms. I don't think they had the arms, for one, and for two,
No, they did not.
we come into it, we're the invaders, and suddenly my enemy's enemy is my friend. Then
Yep, all true, Dave.
nationalism comes in, and they're Iranians first,
All true. All
And
true. Thank you for your call.
All
I
right,
appreciate it.
good talking to you again, Edwin. Be
Yep.
well.
All right. Next up is Dave again.
Hey, good afternoon, Mr. Eisendrath. It's
Hello.
Chi-Town Dave here. I'm first-time caller.
Well, thank you for
And,
calling. Thank you for being part of this.
First-time caller to your show. We got to do something about all of this, man. I'm telling you. When you were talking about the airlines that transport migrants in chains, kind of reminds me of the Nazis when they put the Jews on all the trains, and they were in shackles too, and also the slave ships. These people, these ICE people, they are the non-humans, not the migrants. They are the non-humans. I can't understand why these people are doing this. Why are they so cruel?
Well,
Why are they
forgive
so
me, Dave.
cruel?
I'm not ready to go there. I think they're all humans, and I think they're behaving abhorrently under the direction of their president, who is a terrible, terrible man. A terrible man.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Can you imagine if Barack Obama had done any of this stuff? Do you remember? I remember when I was following Alex Jones at the time, and Alex Jones was talking about how Barack Obama and the Democratic Party were going to build FEMA camps, and he was talking about, we're headed for a new world order. I'll tell you what, we got the new world order, but it's not the new world order Alex Jones was talking about.
Yeah.
It's a new.
The answer to your question is
right.
no. The answer, Dave, to your question is no. I cannot imagine what you asked me to imagine. I have good imagination, but there is no way to imagine Barack Obama ever behaving like this.
I know.
There's no way to imagine Bill Clinton ever behaving like this. There's honestly no way to imagine W behaving like this.
Absolutely.
Right? There is no American president ever who would behave like this one.
I know. I understand it. I agree with you 1,000%. But I'm just saying, can you imagine the reaction, though? What I meant by that was, can you imagine the reaction that the Republicans would have had if any of that had actually happened?
Yes, easily I can imagine it, because they had that reaction even though nothing happened. They made it up and then acted that way. So yeah, they have no credibility anymore, and America is completely soured on them. Now we have to show up and vote, but America knows these frauds for who they are. Dave, listen, I said first, thank you for calling, and I hope you'll do it again.
I will. I promise.
Thank you. All right, Greg, you're next.
Yeah, hi, Edwin. Thanks for taking the call.
Of course.
The purpose of my call today is one of the things that I noticed with this thing with the removal of the pornographic graffiti on the John F. Kennedy Center is that when they put it up back in December of 2025, they did so without the use of scaffolding. That they used is a scissors jacks type.
That's right.
Lifting.
They put it up very quickly with the scissors jacks, and there was no screen. We all saw it happening.
Right, but that's my point. I've not seen anybody bring that up, and I think that's the reason they did that is when you go back and look, that's what these authoritarians do. They want it done quickly, so people are shocked. But they also look at it as, well, it's inevitable now. But now you look at last night or yesterday when they have to do it because now grudgingly they're going to have to do this. What do? They stall because now they have to use the scaffolding. And actually the rules say that they do have to use scaffolding, the rules of Washington, D.C., because I did look it up. Yeah, so it's anyway. That's pretty much all I wanted to say, and I just
thank you, Greg. But they did take them down, even though we protected the poor man's ego, so that we didn't have to see them come tumbling down. They came down, and everyone knows they came down like a Saddam statue, because you know what? There was a live feed where nothing happened because they kept delaying, but Americans in the tens of thousands were tuned in to see this happen. This was like pulling down a Saddam statue, and Americans are thrilled to have the John F. Kennedy Center back. All right. We are nearing the end of our time for today, which means it's time to hear from Roosevelt.
Double E. Thanks for taking my call.
Of course.
The island that Ivanka and her husband wants to buy, I believe it's called Zazan or Zazan. I found out that there's caves. So what is your opinion as far as this island? What do they really want it for? Because the location is ideal. I don't know if they're getting it because if the Democrats get in there or if we have a Democratic president, they're going to wind up in jail eventually, all these people. And notice that the president wants, let's just say, immunity for all his buddies and family members, and they don't want their taxes to be, scrutinized.
Mm-hmm.
So what do you think they want the island for? I don't think it's because they want to build resorts or build whatever, like Ivanka said.
Okay, well, that's a surprise. I hadn't thought about that, Roosevelt. So you're telling me you think it might be this is their getaway. This is where they're going to go, because it is gorgeous, right? You think they're building themselves their own private island like these rich people have. Well, I haven't heard that from anybody, and I haven't thought about that. I just thought it was more, we're going to make money. But you might, you never know. You might be right.
I don't know. But here's another, like I said before, what do you know about the fact that they have caves? From what I've heard, it's like a small town, like a small city down there of caves. So let's say this knucklehead in the White House, bombs people, or they have a place to go to. Not only the other aspect of it, which is the one I mentioned, the getaway, because that if the Democrats get in there, it ain't going to be all these old fogies. It's going to be all these young people that want justice. And this thing has been a long time coming since Nixon. That's how we got here, in my opinion. We lived it. You lived it. I lived it. Every single Republican president had a scandal, anti-American scandal. In other words, let's just say doing business with the enemy or our enemies.
Well, yeah. So I'm thinking about that. Nixon illegally interfered with peace in Vietnam to delay it, to help him with an election. We had Iran-Contra with when Reagan was president. There was something, I can't remember what it was. certainly we had, God knows, when W was
Well,
president, the whole world got messed up.
W was the Junior was both wars, but his father didn't he start all this stuff with Osama bin Laden by messing around in sacred airport, some airport or something to that effect. I don't remember exactly.
No, that was in when Reagan was president. We had troops there, and that led to the blowing up of that base in Lebanon that killed so many people. And we moved back. So I don't, I can't really recall a scandal like that, and maybe there wasn't one when George H.W. Bush was president. But the two, the wars that W had were terrible. And then, of course, we had Trump 1 and Trump 2, which makes all of them look like Abe Lincoln. I mean, as bad as they were, because there's nobody like Trump. There's nobody like Trump. But there was like zero. I mean, you can disagree with a lot of things Barack did. And I disagree with some things he did, but there were zero scandals.
Yep.
Right? Bill Clinton's scandals were of a more personal nature. They weren't they weren't. He wasn't selling the country out.
Yeah. I don't know if you have time, Double E, but what do you think about the circus tomorrow in Washington that he's going to have?
I think
the UFC fights.
Well, first off, I'm not going to see it, and no.
But I'm saying, what do you think about the expense, coupled with the expense of you guys were mentioning the Kennedy Center, what he did, the amount of money that this guy's just blowing it. He's just blowing it. He doesn't. Well, of course he doesn't care, but
he doesn't care. The costs are staggering of this man's corruption and terrible leadership. And the costs can be measured in money. They can be measured in American prestige. They can be measured in the standard of living of every American. They can be measured in the safety of Americans. Nothing is better because of this man. They can be measured in the size and quickly spreading diseases, whether that's measles in humans or flesh-eating flies in our cattle, because they've taken, they've ended all the programs to protect us. So no amount of cost is going to recover. We'll have to rebuild, but we can't recover what he lost when it's taken. But his party, that little birthday party he's throwing for himself, remember, this was supposed to be his. We're starting our 250th birthday as America, and instead, because of who he is, he's throwing himself a private birthday party in our most wonderful public places. It's not open to the public. You have to pay to see it, on one of his allies' streaming services. Tickets are being sold to, as I said at the beginning of the show, and forgive me for saying it this way, but his ass kissers and oligarchs who want to, who are willing to pony up the money to be there for this bore. In the meantime, he's sort of made a mess of the White House, but there's that hole in the ground where he tore down the East Wing. I mean, there's just everything about it is actually, Roosevelt, it is sad and repulsive, and that's where we are. But it's also from which we will rebuild, because Americans, and this isn't Democrats and Republicans, Americans, no matter what party they ever thought they were in, or if they've never thought about if they hate both parties, they really hate this. They really like saying, you think you're going to sit at the top of the world? Your friend just became a trillionaire. He's spending that money to keep you on your little throne. You're tearing up the White House, and we can't pay for gas, and you don't care.
Yeah.
What I think about it is,
himself. He said, I'm sorry, W. He said it himself. He loves
the inflation.
Yeah. And you know what? Speaking of his cronies, did you see Rubio answering any of the questions that he was asked? He said that he didn't, that Trump didn't fall asleep. He was sitting right next to him when he fell asleep.
Yeah, I mean, all of it is just, I mean, I wish I'm laughing because it is funny. It's dangerous
It
and
is
it's really
funny.
a problem, but it's also funny.
Yeah.
All right, Rosa. Well, thank you for bringing us to the end of another show. I appreciate your time and your attention always. And everybody, thank you for being with me again today. And I look forward to it again next week. In the meantime, go out and enjoy this day, a day where we have liberated one of the buildings in Washington, D.C. from this hideous fascist graffiti. Take care.